What is going on? What is going on? Thank you for joining me tonight on The Gospel Truth. I'm your host, Marlon Wilson, and we have another great one for you today. I have Mr. Richard Suttles and Mr. Robert McKever. Oh, dude, I already forgot, man. Don't chastise me too much, man, but it's all good. I had these two guys with me, and we're going to have a great discussion. And I just want to thank you for joining me today on this episode of The Gospel Truth. And with that, I want to go ahead and encourage you to like and follow The Gospel Truth. Hit that notification bell, subscribe, do what you have to do to make sure that you're in the loop with The Gospel Truth. And, you know, it's an exciting time because if you've watched my most recent show, it actually was Let's Talk. And Let's Talk is actually another compartment to The Gospel Truth, where I discuss some of the more cultural aspects that we're dealing with, sometimes politics, sometimes more stuff that's happening in the body of the church. And also I do some theology and some Bible studies, you know, so I'm trying to revamp that, get that going. So hopefully you're checking that portion of The Gospel Truth out. Also, all my content is on podcast, so if you just want to listen to the audio, you can flow over to iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, and all that content is over there. Hit that subscribe button and make sure that you are hitting that notification, leave it a good rating, should I say. Leave a good rating, help me out, you know, just get The Gospel Truth on the map, and be able to compete with some of these other podcasts, man. You know, let's get this gospel-centered stuff out there. With that said, let me go ahead and go over a couple announcements before I bring these fellas in real quick. All right, coming up, August 8th, couple days, 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, that's 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I have Sam Addison versus LaRon Campbell. Hebrew Israelite versus Christian. Can you be justified by the law of Moses according to Paul? Should be a great one. I hope you can join me on that one. Make sure you remember that time, 12 p.m., 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, all right? After that, I have myself. You know I had to jump in there. I can't be just letting everybody else get some of the goods. You know, I want to jump in the octagon too, right? So I had to jump in there too, man. I got me a debate coming up, more of a discussion. It won't be a formalized debate. Bringing them on as a guest, and we're going to have some conversation about morality. That's coming up August 11th at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. After that, I have Sai 10 versus Armin Navabi. They're going to come on Does God Exist? That's coming this August 13th at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. This should be a great debate. After that, I have George Alvarado versus Matt Singleton. Was Jesus eternally or incarnationally the Son of God? So this should be a great discussion. I don't see many people discussing or debating this topic. So be on the lookout. August 22nd, 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. We got a great debate. We got a whole bunch of shows coming up. Once again, this is just the next several shows, man. If you ain't in the loop with The Gospel Truth, you are missing out on some great stuff. And I want you to be in the loop, and I want you to be able to experience what The Gospel Truth has going on. So make sure you're hitting that subscribe button. I can't emphasize it enough. Hit that subscribe button. Also, before I bring these guys in, hey, I got some new Gospel Truth mugs. I got them redesigned. Some of you guys out there that's been on the show, y'all got some of the old design Gospel Truth mugs, man. And some of y'all hit me up already and you want to get the new mug, man. You know, the only way you can get these for free is if you participate in the debate. So the two participants tonight will get a free mug. If you are interested in supporting the ministry and wanting to buy a mug, I appreciate that. All you have to do is search in the description of this debate. There's a Venmo website there. And also, if you just want to do it through the live chat on YouTube, you can super chat. These guys are $10, so you can super chat in there. Just put $10 mug. I'll get your address from you, and we'll have a mug on the way to you. All right. Thank you in advance for anyone that does support the ministry. I appreciate you. With that said, I'm gonna bring these fellas in so we can have this conversation. What's going on, guys? How you doing, man? Y'all ain't gonna say hi, y'all just gonna wave? That's how we getting down?
You go ahead, Robert.
I'm doing good. I was waiting for him.
Oh, okay.
I was waiting for you.
All right, cool, man. I gotta make sure you guys are live over there. You can be having no handshakes, man, and waving and all that stuff. But thank you for joining me, you guys. I appreciate you for coming on. And this has been a long-awaited debate. You guys have been patiently waiting. I think we set this up about a couple months ago, and it's been some time, man. So everyone out there, I want you to know that Robert actually was on a show before, and that debate didn't necessarily go as planned. It was actually, I think utter disaster would be the perfect way to describe that debate. Not on Robert's side, but the person he was debating. It was not pleasant at all. But it's all good. I got Robert back in there, man, and Mr. Richard. He's actually, he's pretty a consistent fan on the page and everything. He watches the debates. And he's a pretty cool guy. He's one of those atheists that are not brash. He enjoys communication. And I appreciate that, man, because I think the best tool that we can have is, even though we disagree on many areas, is the area of communication. And once that gets broken, man, it's tough to deal with. But I thank you guys for coming on. And before we jump into the body of this debate, we're gonna go ahead and give you a chance to introduce yourself to the audience. So, Robert, if you don't mind, man, give a quick introduction to yourself, man.
Yeah, I'm McKever, 6 years old. I'm the founder of Bless the Streets Ministries, which is a ministry focused on preaching the gospel, making disciples, and raising up a generation of preachers who have sound doctrine and sound theology.
All right. Thank you very much. All right, Mr. Richard, if you can go ahead and give a quick introduction to yourself.
Hello, I'm Richard Suttles. I have a page called The Faithiest Atheist on Facebook and on Twitter. I don't have much followers. I just got started. I'm the kind of atheist that's a weak atheist. I haven't converted anybody away from religion. That's not really what I'm about. I focus more on radicalization for my work and my academic career. I'm really focused on what makes somebody behave one way and suddenly get so fixated on something that they want to hurt somebody else. So that little cognitive process is kind of what I focus on.
All right. Thank you guys once again for joining me on this episode. So we're going to jump into this debate, man. The topic of this debate is, if I can remember correctly, what's the topic of this debate? Sorry, guys. I have a lot going on, man. So let me, what's it? Oh, are moral intuitions necessarily moral facts? So this would be an interesting one because the topic itself is kind of unorthodox. It's not necessarily something we usually see. So I'm interested in hearing you guys' arguments. So with that said, the topic, that's the topic, and the format is going to be 10-minute opening statements between you, 10 minutes apart, 10-minute opening statements, and we're going to jump into a 5-minute rebuttal round. After that, we're going to have a 50-minute cross-examination and discussion. So the first 30 minutes of the cross-examination will be cross-examination with a question answer. So I kind of want to be strict on that. Let's get the question and then get the answer in. Then after that, we're going to have a 20-minute open discussion where we're going to just a free-flowing conversation between you two. And I'm also going to be jumping in whenever, if I hear something that tickles my ear, I might jump in and have an extra, want some more clarification or something like that. Then we're going to follow that up with, I believe, a 10-minute closing, and then Q&A from the audience. Sounds good?
Good.
Yep.
All right, cool, man. All right. So I think Richard, Robert, you're arguing the affirmative in this debate. So you are up for your 10-minute opening, man.
Okay. I can begin now?
Hold on, let me bring this time up real quick. Also, when you hit the 1 minute mark, you hear this little chime. You hear that chime there, so that'll let you know you have 1 minute left in your opening statement. Let me pull up the time. You'll see the time up in the upper left-hand corner there. So let me set this up real quick, and then I'll let you know when you are set to go. All right.
I might not.
You are set to go.
Okay. So the title of this debate is Moral Intuition Necessarily Moral Facts? To understand what moral intuition is, we must first define moral intuition. According to the Moral Psychology Handbook, moral intuitions are strong, stable, immediate moral beliefs. So how are our moral beliefs developed? The common view from the atheist perspective is that it is subjective. By implication, the title of this very debate gives credence to this belief if moral intuition by definition do not fit what is moral. The common objection to such a subjective view is that if what is moral is determined by the person, then by what rule do we use to measure that it is wrong to harm another individual deems it moral? The objection to this response is that if what is moral is what is best to maintain a healthy society, no harm to an innocent individual, this does not address objection to subjective morality, in that it has no rule to measure moral goodness aside from personal conviction, which can be biased. So what is the evidence for objective morality? Number one, we're born with a sense of morality. Doctors such as Francis Collin advocates for a moral code implanted by God based off of altruism, exhibited among people who offer to give their kidneys to strangers. Francis Collins is head of the National Institute of Health, and what he quotes is, "Such acts of selflessness prove that our moral judgments and moral actions cannot be fully explained by the forces of biological evolution. They demand a theological explanation." Again, he's the head of the National Institute of Health. Paul Bloom notes, "Developmental psychology, supported by evolutionary biology and cultural anthropology, acknowledges morality as a natural occurrence." Paul Bloom, again, is one of the top of his class in the field of psychology and physiology. He notes natural occurrences that are found within us, such as moral sense, empathy and compassion, rudimentary sense of fairness, and a rudimentary sense of justice. He notes this in his book, Origins of Good and Evil, page 5. Second, the evidence found in babies. Paul Bloom notes, again in his book, Origins of Good and Evil, in page 8, "The brain, like the rest of the body, takes time to grow. So I am not arguing that morality is present at birth. What I am proposing, though, is that certain moral foundations are not acquired through learning." So when he is saying, "I am not arguing that morality is present at birth," he is neither accepting nor rejecting that morality is imbued in us. And the reason why he is making a statement like that is because there's inability to verify whether there is morality present or not present, as you cannot test babies under 3 months old. Does that mean that he then rejects morality imbued in us? No, because we can test babies that are over 3 months to get an indication if morality is embedded in them. For if we can find a sense of morality in 4 months and higher, then that can lead to the logical conclusion or the logical possibility that morality is embedded in us, or else what means would they have learned to obtain that sense of morality? So what test did he do? Him and his other colleagues did what was referred to as puppet test. He began with 1-year-olds, and what they did is they took a good puppet and a bad puppet, and the two puppets played together with a ball, and the bad puppet stole the ball from the good puppet. The 1-year-old took the ball from the bad puppet and smacked it. The finding of this shows a fundamental understanding of fairness and justice, as the 1-year-old recognized that it was wrong to steal the ball, and then it smacked the bad puppet, showing that the 1-year-old recognized that the bad puppet was deserving of punishment for stealing the ball. He did this again to 6 and 10-month-old to see if there would be similar results. And what he did is he brought a helpful puppet and a hindering puppet were shown. So one puppet who was kind and who was helpful, and then the hindering puppet was making things difficult and was to be the bad puppet. About all the babies reached for the good guy. To test the relevancy of the theory that the babies preferred what was good, they then put a neutral puppet. So there was a good puppet, a neutral puppet, and a hindering puppet. Once a neutral puppet was added, the babies again leaned to the good puppet and the rest to the neutral. None were attracted to the bad puppet. This study was repeated with 3-month-old, which responded towards the good guys. Now the difficulty is how do we determine the 3-month-old response to each puppet if they cannot speak? Well, what we do know about babies is when they stare at something, that's when they take interest in it. So how they came to the determination that the 3-month-old leaned towards the good puppet versus the bad puppet was their attention was focused towards the good puppet. This study again was repeated by adding a neutral puppet, which showed that the babies favored the neutral puppet. So with a 3-month-old, it differed from the 6 and 10-month-old in that none of the babies acknowledged the good puppet nor the bad puppet, but the neutral puppet. The interesting thing about that finding is that it shows that there has to be something rudimentary and developmental within them. So there's a rudimentary sense of morality, which causes them to reject what is bad. But there is also a developed sense of intuition. As they grow older, they are more cognitive in their judgments towards the good guy. But the fact that they focused on the neutral shows that there is a fundamental moral intuition or inclination towards something that is good. Note, they still paid no attention to the puppet, suggesting they have a moral sense to reject what is wrong. The puppet test gives inference that there is a moral-based intuition and mental-based intuition. Now, understanding intuition that develops over time. And the reason why I make mention of that is there has to be a difference between moral intuition and generalized intuition. As what is observed in babies, when we get older, we do not see that. We see a separation from that. So our moral intuition must be separate from intuition. And when you look at the definition of intuition, it is the ability to understand something immediately without need for conscious reasoning. This intuition is something that develops from experience, upbringing, or trauma. This is something that can be observed to be experiential. Just through basic observation of people, you see that they develop unconscious responses and unconscious intuitions based upon what they have gone through life, traumas, be it experiences, etc., etc. Our intuitions all have motivations that are divided into 4 categories. The instrumentalist, which is motivated based on existing desires. The cognitivist, motivated by what is perceived to be true. The sentimentalist, which is motivated by emotions. And the personalist, motivated by what is consciously good. Another evidence shows separation of moral, and we don't see this motivation found in babies. It is something that we see as we grow older. So babies are not motivated to do moral acts, but then when we get older, we are motivated to do moral acts, and that shows that there's an imbued moral that is placed in us. This sense of developed intuition based upon experiences, upbringing, trauma, etc., is not to be lumped in with moral fact. To say such, the hurdle then to overcome would be the evidence of fundamental morality found within babies. They naturally understand basic of fairness, justice, and equality, which is by definition moral intuition. Since this moral intuition exhibited within scientific studies demonstrates this across the board, it provides evidence for an objective-based morality. When one deviates from that objective-based truth, it is not moral that is involved, but an intuition that is separate from the mode embedded in us. How can this division, if morality is objective? To answer this question is rooted in understanding what is a moral compass that guides our moral intuitions. Thomas Jefferson, who many philosophers and even Paul Bloom himself acknowledge to be correct in his assertion, notes the moral sense is as much of man as his arm or his leg. It is given to all human beings in a stronger or weaker degree. Force of members is given them in a greater or lesser degree. It may be strengthened by exercise, as may be particular of any limb of the body. This is to show we can exercise our conscience in a way where we are led by moral behaviors, or we can sear it, though the searing may occur from external forces outside of us. So combined all of these, and we see scientific evidence and the scientific fact that morality is imbued in us, thus objective as it is evidenced through babies.
All right, you finished right on time, man. You got that last 10 of them, man. All right, Mr. Richard, you're up for your 10-minute opening. Let me get your time set up, and I'll let you know when to go.
Okay.
All right, Richard, you're up for your 10-minute opening statement, man.
Okay. I want to say a couple of things about epistemology and evolution first, and I'll define epistemology as I get into it. There's a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. It's written by Daniel Kahneman. And Kahneman says that all humans have these two systems of thought. One is system one thinking, and the other is system two thinking. And so system one thinking is automatic. And Robert was talking about this a minute ago. This is just quick thoughts that come right at you. There's no analysis. It's almost intuitive. You're not looking for it. These are just conclusions and feelings that come right at you. Now, system two is much more analytical. And this is where epistemology comes in, because this is where you're saying, how do I know what I know? How can I prove what I know? And so this is where system two comes in and is testing what you think you know to see if you can find out what's true. And so Kahneman says that system two, this analytical part, can correct this intuitive part. So you can have an intuitive thought, and then your system two can do some analysis, and then maybe a couple of years later, your intuitive thought has changed. So in 2 years, you've changed your mind completely on a topic. It could even be a moral topic, according to Kahneman, that your system two has changed on system one. But Kahneman says another thing that can happen is that your system two becomes like a press secretary for system one. So in other words, system one doesn't budge. System one says, I'm holding to this no matter what. And then system two goes out and it finds evidence, finds some sort of evidence to make that system one conclusion seem true. And it'll dismiss any disconfirming evidence. Or if it's bothered by the disconfirming evidence or potentially disconfirming evidence, it'll build a case against it. So it starts to build a case against anything that might be disproving to that system one thought. So those are the two things for epistemology, is that system two can change system one, but system two can also go to work for system one. Now, really quick to talk about evolution, I want to talk about three moral wiring systems that we all have. Okay, and the first moral wiring system is selfishness, self-interest. So this is, hey, I'm looking out for me. I care about what I want. Never mind the other guy. I'll compete with them so that I get more for me, and then my genes pass on. That could be for a cell or organisms or people. That self-interest wiring is first. The next layer above that is the cooperation wiring. Now, when you have cooperation wiring, you have things that are working together. Imagine like animals in a field or animals in a geographic area, and they're hunters. Some of these self-interested predators are just working by themselves, and they're really great predators. But then say over here you have a group of the same species that aren't as great, but they start working together, maybe by accident, or maybe they decide to do it. However that happens, we can get into that later, but they start cooperating. Now at this point, natural selection might point to these cooperators and say, your collective effort is doing better than any of these self-interested animals. And so at that point, that species might start getting this wiring for the cooperation. So in this case, cooperation wins by natural selection. In this case, there's another situation where self-interest completely destroys cooperation. And this can be, imagine like a village, a town of people who are all really nice and they all cooperate no matter what. And then one self-interested person comes in and says, okay, cooperate with me. And they say, well, who are you? And he says, well, it doesn't matter, cooperate. You're a cooperator, cooperate. Well, okay, he's right. And he could go in and completely oppress that whole village. He could ruin that whole village. And people who have this cooperation wiring, they might forget about that and go back to their self-interest wiring and start competing back with him. And then pretty soon, all the collective effort for that town is ruined by this self-interested. So sometimes natural selection will point back to the self-interest and say, actually, in this case, self-interest beats cooperation. And that leads to the third realm. And this third realm of wiring is called ultrasociality. And I'll talk about some books that bring up that word. But ultrasociality, think of that like zealots. If you can think of zealots, people who are just absolutely fixated on certain standards, it's got to be an exact certain way. And everybody is on those same standards, and they all agree on those same standards. And if you have that same village, and they all agree on these same standards, and they're circling around these same standards, and then a self-interested person comes in and says, hey, cooperate with me, they might kill him because they're not cooperators at that point. They have standards, they have consequences. So if they're telling each other and they're telling the outside world, we have these standards, and if you don't do it, we have these consequences. So an outsider comes in, he might not do well. They might kill him, they might take him for a slave, they might just toy with him because in their minds he's not really human. He's not keeping up with these standards, and so he doesn't matter. They'll also turn on themselves. So you have a village and they're all agreeing on these standards. It gets to the point where they start to even compete with each other to see who can be more giving towards this standard. And this is where you might get somebody who has a martyr mindset, where they're saying, I'm going to give up part of myself towards this standard, which seems irrational. But if you have the whole village doing that towards the good of their village, then they will absolutely, well, I say absolutely, in many cases, it's not, I want to make a point here, it's not absolute. In many cases, that village of zealots can outcompete the cooperators and the self-interested populations. And there's even a theory that we're all descended from that. At some point, there were fierce tribes of zealots, and that all of us came from those zealots, which is why we have that wiring, which is why you might see somebody get suddenly furious about a football game or a politician or a certain kind of dish, because they get so wired up and fixated on it that just becomes a big thing for them. So with all three of these things, with this ultra social wiring, cooperative wiring, self-interested wiring, they're all competing with each other. And it's intertwined with your epistemology. And your epistemology is saying, this is what's true, and no, wait, maybe this is. Your morality and your epistemology start to mix together, and they become like this one force where you start to think. And in fact, everybody watching this debate, if you've stayed with us this long, you're probably among this crowd where you're really interested in what's true and what's right, and it all kind of works together. So you've kind of come up with a coherent and consistent worldview where you have these standards for epistemology and for morality, and they all kind of merge together. And so this is why I think with all that mixed together is how we get these common moral platforms, which Robert was talking about. I'm going to repeat some of the moral platforms that he's talking about. First of all, your self-interest isn't necessarily bad. So you might be looking out for yourself because you want to take care of your family or your community. So taking care of yourself is that's part of it. Loving your family, having affiliations with friends and or coworkers or associates where you've helped them and they've helped you. And so far, like Robert was saying, you're probably born with that. This idea that you're going to be that you're going to love your family unless something goes wrong, and you're going to help take care of your community. You're probably born with that. Now, where it gets really interesting is when you get into this ultra social, these standards and stuff. What I'm going to argue is that you have like this well of meaning. So this is a well of meaning that you're born with. So you already have the wiring for it, but it's not full. So you have the family, you have the caring for your neighbors and things like that, but you have a standard, or you're going to have a standard, and you're going to say, okay, this is really important. I'm going to dedicate myself to this, and I'm going to do what I can in defense of the standard. If you get to that point, and I would say that the viewers watching this are at that point with something, then you start to feel real compassion towards other people who are also loyal to that same standard. And you might start to distrust people who don't have that loyalty to your standards. And by the way, it can be multiple standards. It's not just one. But you have these things. You think they're very important. You think it's worth giving up part of yourself in defense of that standard. You feel a strong kinship to other people who feel the same way. And you might feel a distrust towards outsiders if they don't. And if any of your own people don't keep up, you might start to think, well, hey, are they in on it? Are they part of the problem? Or are they becoming weak? And so this is something that I think we're all born with. But I think that well can be filled, and I'm going to talk about this more after the opening statement. I think it can be filled by your outside environment. So you might have this well, but it's not yet filled. So if you're born in one situation, you might be a Christian, and another one you might be a Muslim, or maybe Hindu, or Shinto, or atheist. It doesn't mean you're going to be that forever, but that cultural, this norm governing information is there waiting for you in your community, and it's going to come in and fill up your well. And if you take an interest in it, it's going to become part of your meaning well. And because that well is flexible, and because the content of that well is flexible, that makes me skeptical that all of our moral intuitions are facts. And when we say moral facts, we're meaning the facts that are true no matter what. I'm skeptical that they're all true because there's so much flexibility there. So I'm going to argue that they can't all be moral facts. That's all.
All right. Thank you both. All right, now we're going to transition into our rebuttal round now. So both of you get 5 minutes rebuttal. Starting with Mr. Robert. You have 5 minutes to rebut Mr. Richard's open statement, man.
You can tell me when I can begin.
All right. All right, you got it, man. Go ahead.
Okay, so first, Richard notes epistemology. The topic that I'm debating, I'm not looking at the epistemology of morality, how our morality carries out. I'm looking at the ontology of morality, because our focus is on moral facts, which is outside of our own behaviors, but the imbuing of that moral sense. So I don't think this is a conversation of epistemology, rather ontology. He's correct when he says intuitive thoughts can change, which is what I addressed in my opening statement. I find a separation between moral intuition and what I call developmental intuition, which is something that is observable, and even something that scientists, especially psychologists, struggle to justify in, because there is evidence to show that there is ontologically moral imbuing, or a moral code that is placed in us. How it's placed in us is there's room for debate with that, but there is evidence to suggest that morality is embedded in us through our conscience. So what you're addressing the developmental-based intuition, which is something that can be changed. That's irrespective of the moral code that is already in us. We have a conscience that enables us to feel guilt, that enables us to feel remorse. And though our behaviors and our actions and our upbringings can change, it can change that conscience, meaning that it can steer it, or it can help lead us and direct us. It doesn't change that conscience is still there, and that we still have that moral compass. Whether we feel that moral compass or not doesn't change that the moral compass exists. Also, you said system one can affect system two, but system two can also be blocked by system one. This again is speaking of biological processes, but like such as confirmation bias, but biological processes are separate from the moral code that's imbued, because the moral code cannot be subjective to biological processes. The biological processes are just a vehicle for the moral code to be presented into the world. Like, for example, if you take a car, if you take the wheels off the car, does that mean you don't have a car? No, it just means the car can't drive. Same thing with biological processes. Biological processes are the wheels that enable the car, which is our moral code, to be displayed. There's mountains of evidence to show that morality cannot begin in the brain, but the brain and the neuron, the firing of various neurons, et cetera, in the biological process, they're just a means for what is embedded in our moral conscience to be released into this material world. And you said there's three types of wirings: the self-interest, the cooperation wiring, which is through natural selection, the ultra society, I do not know how to pronounce it, zealots, and that we all descend from zealots. Again, this confirms what I was saying about developmental intuition. That does not change the ontology of morality, because babies do not have this wiring. I mean, though you can suggest that they have self-interest, but at the same token, they have things that you would expect to happen from learning moral behavior. So, for example, if a baby sees somebody hurt, they're naturally going to be inclined to go over and rub the area that is hurting. That was not something that they were taught to do. That was something they just naturally did. So it shows that there is a moral code, though there is evidence for these various wirings. That does not mean that there is not ontologically a moral code that is imbued in us. And that's natural selection. You talked about natural selection. The evolutionary morality seems like it makes sense on a logical level, except there is one argument that can disprove that. Natural selection is based off of survival of the fittest. That's similar with Darwinian evolution and the whole facet of evolution. So when you look at psychopaths, manipulators, and sociopaths, they are more likely to be successful as long as they don't get caught with their violent natures, et cetera, and it's because of manipulative tactics. So according to the theory of natural selection, they would be deemed what would be considered the fittest, but their moral actions are different from what we consider to be moral. So that causes various obstacles with evolutionary morality. And I can see the rest of my time.
All right. Thank you for that rebuttal. All right, Richard, you're up for your 5-minute rebuttal.
Okay. Yeah, the first thing I want to stipulate for the audience is that there's such a thing as what's ontologically true. And this could be that the sun exists. And it doesn't matter what everybody thinks about it, the sun's still going to exist. So these are facts that they just exist no matter what. Whereas our epistemology is what we think about the world, and there can be overlap. We could look up at the sun and say, okay, the sun exists, or we could believe in say there's a village who lives next to a volcano, and they could believe that that volcano is a deity and that they have to throw stuff into the volcano in order to stay alive. That's their epistemology. It might not be ontologically true that the volcano is a deity, but through their epistemology, they believe it. So these are two separate things. Even though there's overlap, they're two completely different ways of looking at things. What's ontologically true and what we epistemically think about. So that's imperative to know for the rest of this conversation. What I'm going to argue is that our epistemology is all we have. And so we can, through that, we might be able to find things such as the sun exists and say, okay, well, that seems to be true whether we agree with it or not, but still we're stuck with our epistemology. So this is the framework through which we analyze the whole world. So, and I'm not saying that there's no objective moral truths. There might be. The thing is, I think we have a hard time demonstrating what they are to people who have different views than us. So if I have a moral belief, let's go back to the village by the volcano. If they believe that the volcano is a god and it's good to throw things into it, and they meet somebody who thinks that it's not, they might argue for generations. They might kill each other. One of those things is true, but they might not ever know it. They might only feel like they know it. And so that's their epistemology. It doesn't change the nature of that volcano, but for them, they're still going to do what they're going to do. So what I'm arguing is that our epistemology causes us to do whatever we do, and we might not be right about what's objective and what's not. But I'm not denying that moral objectivity exists. It might. It's just really, really hard to demonstrate it to somebody who disagrees. It's easy to demonstrate to somebody who agrees with you. Going back to the village, the volcano village. Hey, that volcano is a god. Yep, we're on the same target. They have no trouble just demonstrating to each other, but to somebody else, they don't. They can't do that, and they're it could be violent between them. Again, doesn't change the volcano. The volcano could be, the volcano might not be, but they're going to act as if it is. And if we're humans acting what we feel is certain, even if we're not right, then we're going to do whatever we're going to do. One thing I want to bring up about natural selection, that you talked about how someone who's self-interested would outcompete the zealots of the cooperation. That's why I was talking about the zealots, because a self-interest guy won't be able to outcompete the zealots usually. He might be able to outcompete the cooperators because they're going to cooperate no matter what. So when he messes with them, they don't have any choice but to keep cooperating. But the zealots will kill him. And so this is why I think we have psychopaths. It's because if you're really going to survive in a town or a village where everybody honestly believes the volcano is a god, you better at least act like the volcano is a god. If you don't believe it, you better at least pretend, and you better show surprise and show excitement at the right time, or you're going to be turned on. They're going to treat you like a violator. That's the whole point of this zealotry, this ultra-social wiring, is to weed out the self-interest so that the good of the collective can move forward. And this is where natural selection will pick the good of the group rather than the self-interest. So in this case, the fittest is the group, because they're cooperating with each other so fiercely, and because they'll turn on violators, then they do end up in this case, natural selection. And again, not always. And I want to say two things here. It doesn't always happen this way, or we would all be zealots right now. Everybody, 7 billion zealots, and we'd all be killing each other a lot more than we are now. We just have that wiring. It doesn't own us. Although you might be surprised. You might think with some people it does, but not always. And then I forget what the next thing that I was going to add to that, but I'll come back to it, I'm sure, later. But I just want to make sure that I get across that survival of the fittest isn't just whoever's the most fierce. Sometimes it can be a group, and the group can be more effective than individuals. And that reminds me of what I wanted to say. There's controversy among this. If there was no religions, if it was all atheists, there's still controversy among atheist evolutionists about whether natural selection will behave on the interest of the group. So that's a gap in my argument. That's what I have. That's all I have.
All right. Thank you guys for the rebuttals. Now we're going to transition to a cross-examination portion of this debate. Once again, the first 30 minutes of a 50-minute discussion cross-examination will be 15 minutes each of asking questions. Then we'll follow that with 20 minutes of open discussion. Okay. So Robert, you are up first to cross-examine Richard for 15 minutes.
Okay, there's a lot of questions that I have for you. So do you believe there's sufficient evidence for the moral code embedded in us?
Yes, with an opening for more content. So you're born. I'm going to argue that, or I'm going to concede that you are born where a baby, like you said, knows love, knows their parents. Obviously wants to take care of themselves. They have that self-interest. But there's also tests about babies where one toddler sees a toy and he hits the toddler to take the toy, and that toddler cries, and then the toddler who hits him recoils. So not only is that self-interest there from birth, so is this understanding that he just harmed somebody and that he wouldn't like that. So I would say there's already more than just self-interest going on, even as a baby. So that happens there. What the thing that makes me cautious is that if we have this well of meaning that has an opening for more stuff, and we're going to fill that stuff in based off of our culture, these social norms that are just out there waiting for us, then that makes me think that some of it is based off of just what you where you're born and where you live. And again, that wouldn't change what's ontologically true. Let's say that Shinto is objectively true. The Shinto religion is objectively true. Let's just say, and you're raised in a Shinto religion. Maybe you didn't get there reasonably, but you were raised in there. You're still right. So, but the fact that we have so many different conclusions at least makes me think that we can't all be right, and that gives me at least a reason to be cautious that all of our intuitions, even our moral intuitions, are based off of objective moral facts.
So do you believe that the moral code that we're born with, do you believe that is morally true, or do you believe it can be true or false? The morality in babies.
I believe that all humans are born just like when we're a single cell, and in that single cell is all this programming that's going to eventually turn into a human body. All that programming is there. It's not fully formed yet. But that morality that I was talking about being compassionate, also when you hurt somebody that hurts you too, that's there. And then this well that's going to be filled in later by your culture, that's also there. So the well is there, but without all the content, but some of the content, the compassion, not wanting to hurt people, or at least you can change your mind on hurting people when you get into this well. But that original sweet baby, everybody loves the baby. That's all there from birth. I agree with that.
Okay, so if you believe that the moral code is embedded, and logically, wouldn't that follow that our moral intuition must be moral?
Well, I think that what it follows is that this works. Just like we're born, just like when we're that single cell, and we're going to be born, we're going to think that sugar is sweet. We're probably going to be addicted to sugar to some degree, and it's just what works. Have the chemical releases that makes us want to eat sugar is going to either help our ancestors and then lead to us having that same addiction. It could end up being destructive later, but it's just something that is there and it's effective. I don't know that it leads to just because something's effective. I don't know that it always leads to something that exists outside of us. So, like if aliens come and they found sugar, they might say, okay, humans would have found this sweet, but would the aliens find it sweet? We don't know. And would the aliens think that taking care of each other is objectively true, or would they just think it's their preference? I don't know. So I'm just cautious to say that it would have to be true, just because there's so much variety. The variety doesn't disprove it, but it makes me cautious.
And so the study you said about the toddlers showing selfish behavior. Well, that you don't need studies in all reality to see that there is selfishness found in babies, but I don't think that's what intrigues scientists. What intrigues them is that their capacity to have morality without it being learned. So even though they have that self-interest, don't you think that that's something worth considering, as there is objective moral truth in the fact they have morality despite it not being taught to them?
Well, the way that I see it is that it's amazing that we not only have the self-interest, so not only is the toddler hitting him to take the toy, he's also recoiling. He's also upset when he sees that he's hurt the other baby. So to have that aversion to harm right off the bat is equally amazing. It's like badgers are born. Is it badgers that build the dams, or songbirds that are born? They're gonna end up singing a song. These imprints, these things that are imprinted in us. And I have a book on that, and it might be backwards from you guys. The fact that these things are imprinted on us is absolutely amazing to me. But I don't know that it leads to objective moral truth, because a wolf might be imprinted to be a predator. So I don't know that that's necessarily a moral thing. This is just something that's helpful. So if you have it kind of programmed in you to do it, that's great. But it doesn't. For me, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a moral objectivity outside of it.
So you don't believe that all babies are programmed with a sense of morality at birth.
I do, but within reason. The self-interest, the aversion to harm, the two things that we just talked about, I think that's there from birth. But then they have this well that natural selection is saying, okay, in 20 years that well is going to be filled with something. And if they're in Ohio, natural selection is going to say, okay, your community is going to fill that well. But then if the parents move to Paris, then natural selection is going to say, okay, now never mind what I said about Ohio. It's going to get filled with what's in Paris. Those norms, and we're a norm-governed species. Those norms are there waiting, and that's going to fill in this well. And in some cases, it's going to replace the aversion to harm. It's going to taper with your compassion sometimes. And so because all of that extra stuff comes into it, that makes me think that there's at least a lot of variation. Not necessarily that nobody's right. Again, there's 7 billion people and there's different views. That doesn't mean that everybody's wrong and that it doesn't exist. It just means there's a lot of variation. So I don't say that there's no moral system. I just say the basic things: the self-interest, the aversion to harm, and this well that's going to get filled in later.
So when I'm talking about the moral code, I'm not talking about a sense of perfection. I'm just talking about a fundamental understanding of morality. So I'm not focused on the epistemology of morality, the application of that, but the ontology of it, the imbuing of the moral code. You speak of natural selection. Natural selection from an evolutionary morality standpoint is based off of the same principles as Darwinianism evolution in regards to survival of the fittest, correct?
It is, yes. Well, and I mentioned that in my rebuttal. You're right that it's survival of the fittest, but it's not necessarily the single most fiercest person or the most devious person who wins. Sometimes the group will outcompete the individual. So yes, survival of the fittest, but the fittest could be a community of nerds who aren't strong at all, but they're all really smart and they work together, and they could be the most fit. And natural selection will say, I don't care that you're not technically fit, but your collective effort is doing better than anybody else, so you win.
Okay. So then how do you reconcile when the fittest are outside of what is moral? That's contradictory by definition for evolution for us to develop morality from an evolutionary standpoint, but then for the end outcome be the people that make it being immoral. So like the psychopath, the sociopath, manipulators, well-respected scientists even notice that as an obstacle. They don't refute evolutionary morality, but they do recognize it as an obstacle for evolutionary morality. How do you reconcile that?
This will be a longer answer, and in my opening 10 minutes and in my 5 minute, I tried to quickly get to that. But what I'm saying is that initial wiring, that self-interest wiring, is the beginning, and then when you start getting into cooperation, that's when you start getting compassion, love for your family, helping your group, returning favors. But then when you get to that ultra-social wiring, now you have a standard. And the standard could be that the volcano is a god and that you have to feed it people and food. Once you get that and you feel loyalty to that, now you're getting your sense of justice and equality and even purity and authority. That's all coming in. So maybe under your cooperation wiring, you're thinking, hey, this is a person I'm going to cooperate. That's fair. But if you get into your zealous mode, then you're thinking, and not always, because like I know some Christians who aren't always like this. But if you think, hey, this is my group, I'm going to take care of my group, I want my group to win, then you're thinking fairness in terms of your group winning. And you thinking pushing other people away is fair because they're not your group and they don't agree with your standards. And it can get even worse. You can think, hey, these people are a violation of our standards. They need to go away. And this is where you can get genocide. It's not always why that genocide happens. But sometimes just because people say our group is correct, this group is wrong, they're a violation, they're an impurity, and they need to go away. And that's part of morality too. Just compassion, fairness, justice, loyalty, purity, authority, and having some kind of traditions towards that authority. Those are all part of morality. And that comes from studies from Jonathan Haidt and Oliver Scott Curry. And by the way, I have a list of about 30 or 40 books that I'll include in this to show where I come up with this stuff. But all of that is part of our morality. And because we have all of that, you could end up being a terrorist, or you could be somebody like you who's out to fight poverty. Right? And so, like, let's say you, Robert, are like, hey, if you're a person, I value you as a person. If you don't believe what I believe, that's great. If you need help, I'm going to help you. Whereas a terrorist will say, let's say ISIS, you have to be ISIS or I'm going to kill you. But you both have the same moral foundations. You both have compassion, standards, fairness, justice. It's just that the ISIS guy is starting with the standard. He's saying the standard is everything. I'm loyal only to that. Anybody who else is not loyal to it is wrong. My compassion is only towards the standard and towards my own. It turns to hatred when it's everybody else. And then I want to teach a lesson to everybody else by getting rid of the impurities, and sometimes even worse. Sometimes I want to torture and make a case about how terrible the impurities are. And he thinks he's being moral. And so this is why you can get so much diversity from these moral platforms that we all have. I agree, we all have these moral platforms, but the fact that an ISIS guy can use his moral platforms, and by the way, this isn't all system 2 thinking. A lot of this is system 1, so it's not all conscious. It's not like a 10-year-old says, I'm going to be an ISIS guy. A lot of things have to happen for this to take place, which is what I study in my counterterrorism pursuit. This is how somebody can use the same moral platforms you have, except they start with that standard and their compassion is against others and they think, I got to wipe out the impurities. Whereas you have compassion for everybody. And you and I have talked for the last month. You have compassion for anybody who's a person. If they're screwed up, you might call the police, but you're not, you don't hate them as a person. They have value. You have compassion for everybody. You still have your standards and you want to teach your standards, but you don't want to wipe away people who are wrong. You want to help. Whereas ISIS wants to wipe them away. Same moral platforms, they've just dialed it. It's like a stereo system. When it comes to their compassion, it's way down here. When it comes to your compassion, it's way up here. It's not to say you don't care about your standards. It's just that you're going to show compassion anyway. And in fact, that might even be part of your well of meaning, is this compassion. Whereas for ISIS, they're like, nah, if I show compassion to outsiders, then my own people are going to kill me. So this, and again, that's some kind of norms that can help a person become like that. It's because these norms are out there in the culture waiting for them, so that when they grow a little bit older, they say, I've got to be fierce and I've got to start hurting other people who aren't like us, or I'm not going to fit in. And that can be unconscious. So you might have a 14, 15-year-old do something horrible just because they're trying to make it, not even thinking yet, am I hurting somebody who's innocent? They're just thinking, you're not like us, so I'm going to kill you. And I know that's really complicated, but It's just that these moral platforms can lead to a whole bunch of diversity, and that's what makes me cautious about ontological moral rules.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not saying they don't exist, just that I'm cautious about it.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. So that leads up to my next question. If you believe that we start off at a moral platform, and I'm talking about babies, because I see a separation between moral intuition and intuition that we develop as a result of all the things that you say. We agree on that. Where the difference is, what is the vehicle that allows babies that have not had any exposure really to the world really? What is the vehicle that enables them to take that moral platform and then apply it, so to speak, for that morality to become materialized?
Right. Well, and this is a gap in my point of view, because when you talk about what's already imprinted on us and things that we're born with, I don't know that I can go step by step as to how all that happens. But I'm just as amazed that babies have that as I am that a wolf is going to chase rabbits, or that a songbird is going to sing a song, or that a beaver is going to build a dam. The fact that that's already there is amazing, but I'm also skeptical that a loving creator made it that way so that we're all on this same objective morals. I think there's such a variety there that natural selection will say, hey, if this works for you and your species is still here in 1,000 years, then that's just going to be the way it is. And these other species might hate it. There might be some mutant spiders that take over the entire world. And natural selection will be like, I don't care. If your collective effort makes it so that you can take over all other animals, so it's just you and plants, that's fine. And natural selection will shrug it off. And the fact that they might have this natural instinct to do that makes me skeptical. And this is science fiction. This hasn't happened. But the fact that that could happen makes me skeptical that there's a ontological rule that says you can't harm or something like that. I think that's appealing. You and I probably have very similar moral codes, but I'm skeptical that it might be an illusion for me.
All right, that's time.
So
that's time right there. All right, Richard, you're up for a 15-minute cross-examination.
Okay, switching topics a little bit. I want to talk about a Muslim. There was a documentary for a Muslim who's in New Jersey, and he goes to work 9 to 5, and then at the end, once he comes home, he goes out into the streets and works with the gangs. And over the years, he's developed a reputation, not only with warring gangs, so gangs that want to kill each other, but also with police and other neighbors, so that they know that he's like a diplomat, and he has literally kept gangs from killing each other. He saved lives. He's not paid, but he has built this reputation. And he says that his exact words are, if you love God, serve your fellow man. And I want to know, and so he says, by the way, he said, that just drives me. He works 9 to 5 because he has to, but his whole passion from the moment he comes home till he has to go back to work or he's forced to go to sleep, and sometimes he'll sleep in the street. If you love your man, if you love God, serve your fellow man. That is his driving force, and it really is his driving force, and it moves him. And I just wanted to know if that resonates with you.
So what do you mean? What do you mean in particular about resonate?
Does it resonate? And that, do you kind of understand where he's coming from? Do you have a similar? Because I know you have your Bless the Streets ministry, and that's partnership, as you were telling me, with the Prisoner Fellowship, and these are ministries where you're reaching out to people who need it. It's not like a mega church who's looking for rich people. You're looking for people who need it more than anybody else. And you might not be making a lot of money, but do you feel as passionately driven? And do you have this sense of, if I love God, serve your fellow man? I know that in the Bible it's written differently, but does all that seem right to you, even though it's a different set of words in a different scripture?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. So I was just going to point out that I think that this is how somebody can have a religion where a lot of people on the news will say, these guys are terrorists, where you could be the opposite of that. If you ramp up your compassion, and if you put in your well of meaning, you love God, serve your fellow man, and that can be like the great commandment in the Bible. And I don't know that atheists have that. Humanists, a lot of humanists are not religious, but they have something similar to that. This is where I think you can have that compassion for other people, put that in your meaning well. You can still have your standards, but you're thinking the best way forward is to go out and help other people, and that can drive you, even if you're not making a lot of money, even if it's not for you, you're dedicated to this other thing is driving you, and you're doing this help for other people, and you feel fulfilled and you feel like you have meaning. I'm saying that can happen to Christians, Muslims, Hindus, Shinto, atheists. It can happen to anybody like that if they form their meaning well in that way. Now, if that turns out to be the objective morality, if it turns out you could care about others, take care of others, focus on that, loving God, it will say there is a God. That could be the objective morality. I certainly love that. I like the idea of people living their lives like that, even if they don't believe in God, thinking they should help other people. But I don't know that it is an objective morality. I just really, really like, and I'm also driven by that idea. But I don't know that it's an objective fact. But I was just going to point out that I think terrorists, and this is what I do all day. I study terrorists justifying killing people. They just take the platforms we talk about and they just switch it and just say the standard is what matters.
Hey, Richard,
and our compassion has to be limited to that.
Let's make sure we're asking questions.
Okay. So my only question is if it resonated with you and you said that it did. And actually, I don't have any other questions beyond that. You can go back to questioning me if you want.
I'm trying to think of some questions.
Okay.
Because I'm really confused because it's like because we agree on many things. We agree on the epistemology with morality. When we get older, I do believe some of us deviate from that moral path. But if morality is embedded in us, then don't you think, therefore, there has to be a motivation for, say, that baby to go and do a moral act? And if there is a motivation, what is that motivation if motivations are things that are learned?
Right. I don't think that when a baby's born, they're thinking in terms of motivation. If it's imprinted, then a baby is just going to kind of act according to its system one, which is going to be pretty basic.
Yes.
It is amazing that the baby's thinking of love towards the people who are taking care of him. It's amazing that he can feel an aversion to harm. So the fact that they're there are great. I'm just not convinced that they're objective moral facts, because if you get older and you become a terrorist and then you push away this compassion for other people and you kill yourself and you go up and you go and blow yourself up with a school bus or something, then that's the opposite of the way what you're imprinted with. And I think that can happen naturally by changing what's inside your well of meaning. And so the fact that can happen makes me skeptical that this compassion and this aversion to harm that we're born with is necessarily objective moral fact. I think it just works for babies. But then if you're born in this ecosystem where you have to be a badass, excuse my language, you have to be a tough warrior, almost merciless, then you're probably going to be a merciless warrior or you're going to die. And again, natural selection is not a moral compass. It might allow species to have a moral compass. In fact, I'm arguing that humans exist because of our moral compass. There's a book called The Secret of Our Success by Joe Henrich. And I'll send a list of books at the end of this for Marlon. But he's saying it's because of our moral compass that we're able to survive. We're not as fierce as, say, apes. We're not as fast as wolves. But the fact that we have this moral compass makes it so that we can a million strong do something together if we have to. We can build pyramids. We can do a bunch of stuff under the right conditions. And he's saying that moral bond is what holds us together. So that makes me think more of like evolution saying, okay, if this is working for you, go with it, but I don't care. And then again, if mutant spiders come and kill you all later, I don't care about that either. You do what you got to do. So like I think natural selection can go ahead.
Yeah. So if you believe that the baby just naturally does moral acts, which that's what it appears like you said. And if I'm misrepresenting what you said, feel free to correct me. Are we on the same page? Okay.
Right. He's born being nice, and he has aversion to harm, and he has feelings of love.
Okay. So if they do it naturally, doesn't that then prove that there is an objective-based morality?
The reason why I'm skeptical of that is that the wolves will have the same thing for hunting rabbits. Maybe when they're baby wolves, they're just going to want milk, but eventually they're going to want to hunt rabbits. So then that just makes me think that it is something that's common across the species, but not necessarily based off of something external to that species. It's just something that helps the species.
Do you believe distinct from other species in the animal kingdom?
You mean just among humans?
Well, I mean, do you believe that humans are distinct from apes and horses and dogs and all?
Well, I mean, I believe in evolution, so I just think that we're animals, but with a moral code. I think the moral code is what makes us, and our epistemology. I think our morality and our epistemology makes us a much different type of species, which is why we're dominant. But I think we genetically came from animals. We just developed this moral and epistemological system, and because of that, we're currently the dominant species. But I don't think we're distinct beyond that. Now, I should say, if I have to save one person versus 100 something else, I'm going to go for the one person because I have a affinity for people. But is that an illusion? Am I just following my imprint and I'm just fooling myself? It's possible. I think that illusions are a huge part of evolution, which is scary and it makes you inconsistent because if it's an illusion, then what? But if it's what we're doing, then it's what we're doing.
Yeah. So, well, I'm not going to refute evolution. I'm just focusing on the aspects of morality. So, do you believe that? What do you believe differentiates us from animals like dogs, apes, etc.? What do you think differentiates us?
That's what I was talking about. That book, The Secret of Our Success, by Joseph Henrich, is that moral code. Another book is The Righteous Mind. It's morality and epistemology working together, and then we create these cultural norms, and these norms are waiting for us. And then because of that, we have collective learning, and so because of collective learning, we can have kids, and in no time they're ready to take up swords, so to speak, and join the battle with us. And of course, nowadays we don't do swords, but they can take up math books. So this culture, we develop culture, and then culture is there waiting for us, and it also affects our genes. There's a disagreement among evolutionists about whether the culture can affect our genes, or at least that natural selection will behave on the group. But I believe it does. And because of that, that collective learning and this morality and this epistemology, that's what sets us apart. And we could lose it. We could lose it in a week. And I think that would just be, it would be devastating, but I think natural selection would shrug.
Yeah, again, we believe in virtually the same thing from the epistemological standpoint, but there has to be an ontological understanding of morality. I believe what differentiates us is our ability to reason. Animals are not able to understand science the way we're able to understand it, math the way we understand it, et cetera, et cetera. They have things that are similar to us. So like morality, there is morality found in animals. You agree with that, correct?
There's a degree of morality that's not like ours, but in many ways.
But do you agree that they have a lesser sense of reasoning than we do?
And I think part of the illusion is making me say that theirs is less. It's just different. It's works for them, and ours is causing us to be dominant. So I don't know that ours is better, but it's certainly much different, and it's working really well for us. It seems to be more complex than any other species.
How does their reasoning differentiate? I'm sorry. How does their reasoning differentiate from our reasoning?
I don't know yet. If I'm trying to rack my brain on any kind of living organisms that can cooperate across geographical space as much as we can. There's different theories about how that could happen. But in terms of, like I was saying before, our morality and our epistemology, and I include epistemology, I include our reason and our use of logic. I include all that in there, and that the more we build that up, and the more it's waiting on our future generations for collective learning, the more likely we are to continue to be the dominant species. So I absolutely agree that ours is sufficient to cause us to dominate the Earth. So you can say better.
Okay, so if our ability to reason was at a greater degree, or whatever term you decide to use, then that means even if it was different, let's say it's not a scale, so we're at equal scales, it just operates in different ways on equal scales. Then how our moral behaviors are demonstrated? Wouldn't they also show differently, being that the starting point is different?
Well, yeah, I do think there's variation among cultures. If you look at the 7 billion people around the Earth, I think that there's a lot of variation, not only for morality but also for reason. I think some things like 2 + 2 = 4, we could go to all 7 billion people and get a confirmation on that, or that the sun exists, or at least that something hot is coming from that direction. I think we could all agree on that.
The people that say 2 + 2 = 5, does that change the truth that 2 + 2 = 4?
Well, no. It would just be easily to demonstrate. You know, like we said in the beginning of this, what our epistemological processes are has no bearing on the status of the ontological truth. If it's just true that 2 + 2 = 4, that's just the way it is. But the way we all operate epistemically, it's been pretty easy for us to demonstrate that 2 + 2 = 4 to other people. But it's not always easy to demonstrate that everything has to happen, according to this guide or these guides, or that we have to have no religion. Those are different meaning systems. So that's just harder to demonstrate. But it's part.
Well, what I'm trying to demonstrate is, I'm not trying to demonstrate the evidence for God. I'm not using a moral argument. My goal is to just see if there's sufficient evidence for objective morality. Can that lead into showing evidences for God? I'm sure it can, but that's a different discussion. So I guess I have one more question because Marlon came on, so maybe our time's up.
Okay.
You got it. Go ahead, because I'm gonna get involved here because I have some questions for both of you. So you can ask me that question, then we can transition and continue the conversation. So go for it.
Okay. Gotta remember now. Sorry, my memories.
If you can't, we come perhaps.
I think
pop back in. You know what I mean? No worries.
We'll
I think that would be better.
Okay, so, Robert, you made the statement that morality is not present at birth. Is that correct? I thought I heard you say morals is not present at birth.
I quoted what Paul Bloom noted. That's not something that I believe. That's what he said, but he didn't say it as an absolute fact. He as a scientist, he has to honestly say things. If he cannot prove it through experimentation, then he can't make a claim that it's present at birth, nor that it's not. So he wasn't saying either or. He was just saying that it's not something that they can demonstrate scientifically.
Okay, all right, because I was a little concerned. I was like, hold on.
No.
Let me ask him that, because I guess I misheard.
Created the image of God after his likeness. I believe that.
Okay, all right, excellent. I'm glad you do, man. I'm glad you do. All right, so Richard. So obviously, you will be considered a materialist. naturalist, materialist.
With one caveat, one caveat is that I don't know everything that naturalism and materialism contains. There could be a lot of realms of physics and quantum physics, and there could be realms of existence underneath quantum that we haven't discovered yet. So because I'm skeptical of deities, I think the laws of physics that we see are all we have to go with. So you could say that I'm a naturalist, but if we learn something new about naturalism, then I'll go with that. Like I don't think that it has to be the laws of physics that we can explain now must explain everything, because clearly that's not the case. If you ask me to explain a lot of things, I would say I don't know. It's amazing. It's a miracle. So yeah, yes, naturalist, but with the caveat that there's so much more to naturalism that I don't know yet.
Okay, fair enough. All right, so right now we will consider you a materialist until new events, new discoveries will come up, right? So
right.
All right. So all right, I'll come back to you, Robert, real quick. So love. All right. So would you say that an animal has the same capacity to love as a human?
Don't forget dogs.
Yeah, dogs. Yeah, dogs, animals. But would you say that animals, dogs, we can say dogs too, has the same capacity to love as a human has? Did you hear my question?
Yeah, Robert, that was for you.
No,
No,
I'm sorry.
actually, I'm sorry. No, I was telling Robert that I will come back to him because he said that he remembered this question. So
okay, you're talking to me then.
Yeah, so it's to you, Richard.
Wait, what?
Okay.
Sorry about that, because I'm like, man, is he thinking that hard? But,
I thought we were waiting for Robert. I'm glad that we paused on this, because I just want to say that, like, I think the love that a dog has for people is probably unequaled, just in terms of they'll do anything for people, for their owners. But I don't think that all animals have the same kind of love that we have. I think some species will eat their young if it becomes if their self-interest wiring has to kick in, they might eat their young. I don't think that their sense of love is the same as ours. In terms of how we express it, the way we express our love for each other and for people who are religious, and by the way, there's atheists who have this feeling for other people, for humanism or for nature. The way people can express that is just absolutely amazing. In fact, there's a theory about transcendence where you have this feeling, and even atheists can have this feeling, where they kind of rise above what they saw as pettiness and everything that they were so upset about before. They suddenly feel like they've transcended above that, and they feel connected to a lot of other people, maybe everybody else. Probably we're the only species that can do that. Like I think a dog is directed towards the master and maybe the family. I say that from the dog's point of view. But for people, this feeling of transcendence is probably unique to our species.
Is love material or is it immaterial?
Well, it's our reaction to something going on in our brain. So there's some kind of hormonal and chemical stuff going on that makes us definitely act on it, and it means something to us. And we dedicate ourselves to our families and to a project or to loved ones. So is it like math? It's something that's there and we perceive it. But if we go away, would it still be there? And I don't know if we go away if it would still be there. But it's definitely not a physical thing that I can touch. It's just something that affects me, and then hopefully affects others that feel that towards me, assuming that they do.
Is there a standard of love? Is there some, as humans, do we have a standard of love that we should adopt or have fundamentally?
It's probably a really complex answer in terms of how we look at it. There's certainly standards pragmatically within a culture, and then there's probably differences between between couples. You might see couples that say, okay, well, I can tolerate this person. And then you have people who say, I can't operate unless I am next to this person. So there's definitely different standards between people and between cultures. I don't know that there's one measuring stone that we can say, okay, you have to meet this or you don't love them. I don't know that there's anything like that. But it's one of those things that when you feel it, you feel it. And if somebody says, well, it's not real love because you didn't do what I did, you're still going to go, okay, well, I still feel it. So
with the idea of love, with the idea of love, would it be wrong? Would it be absolutely wrong for me to say that to pay somebody to love you? Like if I pay somebody to say, hey man, I want you to love Richard, and that person didn't really love you, but I paid that person to love you, would he or she, would she, I say he, I don't, would she,
pick your poison.
would she be wrong for accepting that money and falsely loving you?
You know, there's too many caveats. You know, what if there's something important that she had to get done? You know, so I can't judge her, or more accurately, I would judge her, but I wouldn't know that my judgments would be objectively true. One thing I do want to point out is that because we have this moral wiring, we definitely perceive a difference between preferences and moral violations. So if somebody has a different flavor of ice cream, I'm like, oh, great, let's talk about that. But if they violate something that I think is sacred, and here I am, an atheist, saying the word sacred, they violate something that I think is sacred, then I'm angry and I want to yell about it. I want to teach them a lesson. So we definitely have that sense of judgment. I don't know that that's based off of an external measuring stone that applies to everybody, but we definitely perceive it.
What do you think, Mr. Robert?
So like I've been saying, the whole narrative, we agree in the epistemology of morality, but the division comes of the ontology. The question I actually wanted to ask you noted that about how different cultures would have different set of standards of morality. So my question would be, take babies from all different types of cultures. Do you think they will demonstrate the same level of morality? I'm talking about 3 month, 6 month. I'm not talking about 3, 4, 5, because that's when you could put the learning aspect. You take right. Babies at their youngest age to where they just naturally do things. You say they have that moral code, they have that moral wiring. Will they act the same way all across different cultures? Or do you believe they possess different moral wirings?
I think they would behave the same across cultures, and if there's any variation, it would be minimal, unless an anthropologist knows something that I don't know. And I've traveled the world. I was in the Marines for 10 years, and as near as I can tell, I think babies around the world are born with that sense of compassion and that aversion to harm others. And they're still fighting each other. That aversion to harm others can be overcome by selfishness, but then you still feel it. So yeah.
Okay, so if it's all across the board, then that's evidence of ontological morality. That's evidence of a moral fact. Just because people deviate from that code doesn't mean that the code doesn't exist. If I take your computer and I put a virus in your computer, and the virus corrupts your computer, does that mean that your computer is not objectively true? Does that mean the computer does not exist? No, the computer still exists. It just was corrupted.
Right. Well, and we're 100% on board on whatever's ontologically true is its own thing, and it could care less what humans think. It's true no matter what. What I'm saying
is that moral intuitions are based off of moral facts.
Well, no. What I'm saying is that we perceive it as something that's absolute, but we might be fooling ourselves. It might be an illusion.
So then, how do babies do moral intuitions? Is it moral intuitions? Is it intuition? What is it?
It's imprinted. This compassion and love and aversion to harm is imprinted as they're born. But what I don't know is if that's not naturally imprinted through evolution to help them, or whether it's just something that has to come from something external to them. If it's true. Good.
I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, if it's ontologically true that babies have to, let's say there's a guy. A guy's like, first of all, First rule, babies are going to be born compassionate, and they're going to have compassion and an aversion to harm, and they're going to struggle with each other, and that's just the way it's going to be, and it's like that. Then that's just the way it is, and there's nothing we can do about it.
Yeah.
But I don't know that because we see babies doing that means that there's this external thing that made that happen. It could be something that just emerged.
So I'm not arguing for where the moral imprint comes from. I'm arguing for the evidence of the moral imprint, because if there is evidence of the moral imprint, then moral intuition has to be moral fact because of the moral imprint.
Okay,
it's a proven fact.
Well, okay, we can say this: if all babies are born with that naturally, then the fact that it's there, then it's just objectively true that it's there. But the reason why I hesitate to say that that's a moral thing, the way that we're talking about it, is the fact that wolves can do that for hunting rabbits. That, to me, those are equal, at least in terms of natural selection. Natural selection is going to say, okay, these wolves are going to chase rabbits. These babies are going to be loving to their moms, and they're going to have an aversion to harm. But natural selection doesn't care. So for me, in order for something to be, and we might have different views of moral objectivity, but for something to be moral objective in the way that I often hear people talking about it, it would have to be true whether humans are here or not. But the fact that we have the moral implant, I think everybody agrees with that. We have some sort of moral system, but just the same way that we have some people are left-handed, some people are right-handed. We have a design for 2 arms, 2 legs. We have these designs, whether they came from a deity or natural selection. I just think morality is a part of it. So the fact that it exists could be the answer, but I don't know that it is based off of an external measurement. And if that's not important to you, then we could just agree that it exists. This moral system exists.
So what is your stumbling block from recognizing that the moral map that we're born with is moral fact?
Well, it's a fact that it exists, but there's also observable that there's so much variation and contradictions, and then that makes me skeptical of this external measuring.
Variations in what regards?
Well, I was talking before that you could be a baby with this, starting off with your compassion and your aversion to harm, and how that can change over your lifetime, so that you morally and intuitively think that you should do the opposite. That makes me think that that's just more.
If somebody says that you're virtuous, does that mean that you never did anything wrong?
No. If you do one thing that's good and the other person sees that as virtuous, and that's just for that event, you did something virtuous.
Okay, if you have a consistent pattern of living what is considered a good life, does that make it true that you are a virtuous person?
Well, by perception, and it might be that our perceptions are all we have. So like you seem to be living a virtuous life. You're spending a lot of times dedicating your time and resources to other people who need it, which I regard as virtuous. ISIS might think that you're, need to be killed because you're confusing people, because you're an infidel and you need to get wiped away, and you're confusing people by being nice to them. Their perception is that you're not, but my perception is that you are, and your perception is that you are.
Do you believe in a conscience?
In conscious? Yes, absolutely. I think. What's that?
Like a sense of division between right or wrong. You have a natural sense, or like it is what enables us to feel guilt.
Well, I think we all have that, but then I'm saying that it can be tuned so much differently and so contradictory to each other. Why do we have guilt? Because I think natural selection it helps us to have one that has a lot of blanks in it. So it starts off like we were saying with this compassion and aversion to harm, but it can be filled by our culture. Well, and this goes to what I was saying about the secret of our success. Well, with these cultural norms, the secret of our success is that we have these cultural norms waiting on us, so that you're born into a society, you have this basic compassion and basic aversion to harm, but then it's going to get filled in later by your surrounding conditions. It doesn't mean you're doomed to be in your community, but you are going to have a lot of wiring as you're raised in that community. A lot of that cultural norms are going to get wired into your brain. So that's that's something outside of ourselves that humans built that's coming into you and becoming part of your brain. So like if we agree that the Shinto religion is wrong, or let's go back to this village by the volcano, if they say the volcano is a god, that those requirements to feed the volcano is going to become part of the people's minds who are in that village. And so the fact that that is programmable, because there's spaces that can be filled with content created by other people, that makes me skeptical that there's, again, this external thing that never changes. And we might have different views. Go ahead.
So you believe the guilt is something that is produced by natural selection. My question is it doesn't the fact that we feel guilt when we do something wrong, and I'm talking about with like young children, because like I have a daughter, she's 5 years old. When she was 1-2 years old, she had some fundamental understanding that something was wrong to do. I shouldn't do it. She didn't understand why. She just had that understanding. There was that level of guilt. I'll give you an example. There was one time when she was at daycare, 2 years old. I come in to pick her up. She runs away, and I'm like, wait, why are you running away? And then they said, oh, she threw a block at a kid. So, and I'm like, wait, how did she know that, hey, I threw a block at somebody, I better run, my dad's here, I don't want him to find out? Because there was something that was telling her what she did was wrong. So if we have that guilt, that has to prove that there is some moral-based fact, because we have something embedded in us that's telling us this is wrong, we did something wrong.
Well, and I want to answer that, but I want to bring up something that we might have a confusion about objective morality. There's an apologist named Stephen Worthy, and his ministry is called Standardized Apologetics. And he was saying that in order for morality to be objective, it would have to be unchanging, and it would have to be applicable to all cultures at all times. Right. So this unchanging, applicable to all cultures at all times. That's so when I think about guilt, yeah, I think, like we were saying before, I think part of that compassion and aversion to harm that all babies universally have, except for psychopaths. And by the way, psychopaths is such a minimal thing that we could just say all people have it. So I think guilt comes with that. If you already have an aversion to harm and you have compassion, then you're going to feel guilt. But the fact that the fact that you and I can feel guilty because we hurt somebody in a car accident by accident, and the fact that an ISIS person can feel guilty that he failed to blow up a school bus, it means that we can do so much with this moral wiring. It's like we have this wiring, but it's so manipulative, or it's so open to manipulation.
Is it manipulative with young babies?
What's that?
Do you think that the moral wiring from babies differentiate from the moral wiring as we get older?
Yeah, it does. I think that you're born with that, like we say, compassion, aversion to harm, but it can be manipulated, and more content can go into there so that you forget all about the compassion and aversion to harm if under certain circumstances.
So then, don't you think that there then has to be a differentiation between moral intuition and intuition that you learn from experiences, environment?
Well, there are intuitions that aren't moral, but it's like to say that there are people in Canada right now, even though we don't have a live feed from Canada, we can immediately intuit that there's people in Canada right now. But I would say that the kind of intuitions that we're talking about is from ISIS to us is moral intuition. So when an ISIS person feels guilty for not killing a school bus, for him it's just as real. It's just as real an experience as you and I feel guilty for hurting somebody in a car accident. It's not that it's subjective, because if I say that it's subjective only and that there is no objective morality, that's an objective statement. All I'm saying is that our subjective epistemology is so powerful that it's hard for me to say that since he feels guilt for one thing and you and I feel guilt for something else, that that means that, what's that?
No, so okay, so what I was saying is how then do you explain all across the board babies at a certain age group, 3 months to a year, all across the board will show what would be considered moral? I mean, there would probably be a small minute of babies that don't fit that category, but the fact that is the generalized consensus with with top psychologists and top psychologists in that field.
And I agree. I agree with
to
that.
the objective. So then there is objective morality if it's all across the board, excluding a small minority.
Well,
It's
I would
just a
just call it
deviation from objective morality. It's just like with a car. If I take the wheels out of a car, does that mean the car no longer exists? No, it just means that you don't have the wheels necessary to move the car. So same thing with our morality. We start off with that moral blueprint, then through external forces that can either foster moral behaviors, or it can sear that the moral blueprint, causing immoral behavior. It doesn't change if the moral blueprint is in there. That's just like with the brain. If you get brain damage, does that mean that you never had a brain, or that your brain didn't function properly at one point? It just means that you just got an injury. So same thing with our behavior.
Right. Well, first of all, now I totally see what you're getting at. If we're all born with this immediate compassion and this aversion to harm, and you're saying that's the objective morality, and then from there, some people can become ISIS and some people can become great people. There is no way I can disprove that, and it could be that's absolutely the case. Some creator made it that way, and I wouldn't ever set out to disprove that, especially from your point of view, especially how you live your life. There's no way. Let's say aliens come and they'll say, "Hey, I can disprove this." I would be like, "Don't tell me, because I don't want to know." Because especially the way you live your life, I think that's fantastic and it's inspiring. The problem is that ISIS sees what we're doing as a corruption, and I get it. It's just their epistemology, but my argument is that natural selection doesn't care. And again, let's just say that the objective morality. Let's say that there's a God. He made objective morality, compassion, aversion to harm. We're all born with it. Some people screw it up. That's a violation. God is the objective decider. He makes the call, and that's it. We can do whatever we want. So that could be what's happening, and there's nothing I can say to disprove that.
All right, so this is the last question.
We can leave it at
this is the last question. We got to transition to closing. So when you say that it's up to natural selection, and natural selection doesn't care, are you so how do you judge ISIS then? How would you judge ISIS and say that ISIS is 100% wrong for the things that they do if it's up to natural selection? How do you argue with natural selection to say that is wrong, unless you have an objective standard that you're channeling that from and saying, regardless of natural selection, cultural cultivating, that is 100% wrong. And I think, you think that's, how do you deal with that?
Okay, here's how I deal with it. First of all, I would judge them, and I would say, I'm not thinking about them in terms of them having different preferences or different feelings or opinions. I see it as a violation of something that's just obvious, and it's 100% objectively wrong. And to me, I'll say that to myself. And then I get angry and I study these guys all day. So I get angry and bitter, and I want to either fight them or I want them to stop or whatever. That's absolutely a sensation that I have. What I'm saying is that I don't know if there's any difference between one of them having that sensation about us. It's still our epistemology. It wouldn't change what the objective is. But if that objective doesn't present itself and come down and say, stop fighting, Robert's right, ISIS is wrong, back to work. Unless he does that, we're never going to be able to demonstrate to ISIS that their experience is better or worse than us. We'll feel it, and we'll agree with each other, but we'll never be able to show it to them in the same way we can show them, hey, here's 2 apples, here's 2 apples, that's 4 apples. They would agree with that part, but they would not agree with that our absolute judgment is true. And that makes me think that it's an illusion. That makes me think that it might be something that we do that just kind of fool of ourselves, like an optical illusion. Sometimes you can't see around an optical illusion. You just are going to keep seeing it that way. I think sometimes that an illusion does better than reality to get people moving in a certain direction that causes that species to last longer. So I'm not saying that everything is an illusion. I'm just saying that because there's so much variety and because our experiences don't seem to be any different than their experiences in terms of how they perceive it, it makes me skeptical that there's an objective standard. There could be. I just don't know of any other way for it to prove itself other than to come out and say it.
Okay. All right. So we're going to transition to our closing statements. And then we'll go to Q&A. We have some questions for you guys, so we'll transition to that. Starting with Robert. You want to go for your 10-minute closing. All right, you can go ahead and go. You got it. 10 minutes.
Okay. Now? Good.
Yep,
If our
you got
moral
it.
intuitions... I'm good?
Yeah, you're good. Go for it.
All right. If our moral intuitions are not moral facts, then there is no grounding from an ontological perspective. There is therefore no origin, no beginning, rather undergoing developmental growth. This learning, since there is no stable beginning point, must go under trial and error, which we have yet to observe in any society. Objections to the embedding of the moral code. One great argument used to support trial and error based morality is that throughout time, culture, and society became increasingly moral in their functions. The objection I pose to this argumentation is that what we are addressing is not the levels of morality, rather the ontology of morality. The goal is not to discover at what point did we become most virtuous, but where virtue begins. Though ancient cultures may have been considered immoral to our culture, and in many cases they are, this is not to say they lacked moral understanding. So my objection is to point out the obvious, which is we have yet to see a trial and error system in the development of societies. The evidence for this is found in ancient Sumer. The Sumerian culture is considered the first major civilization. They are known to be the cradle of such for civilizations even to this day. One of their biggest credits is their development of laws. If morality has no grounding and is simply developed over time, then on what basis were Sumerian laws based off of? If there were no written laws prior to Sumer, then logically we can come to the conclusion that they possessed an idea of morality. This morality is written on the heart and are conscious and expressed through written laws. Ancient laws were flawed. This is also an argument used against objective-based morality. Though ancient laws have flaws, they maintained a functional society, which suggests they had a baseline understanding of morality. The atheist typically defines morality as whatever creates a functional society. This is partially true, but taken in the definition of morality is wrong. The effects of moral behaviors produces functionality, but the intention behind that behavior determines morality. So, morality is intent-based in terms of what is good for that person, not just a functionality, but on a personal level. The flaws of ancient laws prove the moral argument, and the moral argument is that our morality is rooted in God, as He is moral, perfect. In that, though they followed the baseline view of morality, they deviated from the purest expression of morality. Morality as we know it today was abstract from the ancient world until divine intervention into human affairs. What then is the evidence of this divine intervention? It is through the introduction of the Mosaic Law. The introduction of the Mosaic Law points to evidence of divine intervention. Many Near Eastern scholars note that the Mosaic Law revolutionized the ancient Near East. The prior law codes punished crimes for the sake of keeping functionality, whereas the Mosaic Law added value. For example, the previous law codes punished murder, while likewise the Mosaic Law did as well. The dividing line punishment was the reasoning, which according to Mosaic law was because they are created in the image of God. How does this provide evidence of divine intervention? Just as Sumerian law had no previous law codes to operate as a backdrop for their laws, neither did the Mosaic law. Objection can be made that observations of flaws within the moral system of the day led to the amped up versions of laws. The issue with this is how would Moses have developed this line of thinking when the entirety of the Near East understood morality in ways that differentiate from individual value? The only way to rectify this challenge is to recognize the law written on our hearts. A divine encounter had to spark what was already in, and if already in us, what gave it to us. To understand this, we got to understand evolutionary morality. Evolutionary morality may provide answers for this very question in that it proposes we develop moral behaviors based upon survival of the fittest. The issue with this line of reasoning is that psychopaths, sociopaths, and manipulators can and oftentimes are extremely successful. They would therefore constitute as the fittest, but by nature go against what is moral. Most psychologists agree with this as well. This leaves us with the only logical conclusion being that we are imbued at birth with a baseline understanding of morality where our conscience is a guide. A conscience operates, therefore, as a moral compass that can be heard or ignored. I can see the rest of my time.
All right. Thank you for the closing. All right, Richard, you are up for your 10-minute closing.
Okay. For my closing, I'm going to start with the evolutionary argument against naturalism. If anybody hasn't heard of that, look up Alvin Plantinga on Google and type in game scientists play. Just put that in quotes, Alvin Plantinga game scientists play. And a PDF should come up first thing. It should be a free PDF. This is a chapter that Alvin Plantinga wrote. He talked about the evolutionary argument against naturalism in a lot of places, but this chapter is the most succinct. And this is where he's a Christian theologist, philosopher, and he argues against everything I've just said. And he says, okay, if everything is an illusion, like you say, and it's just kind of geared towards survival, and it's not geared towards truth, then how can we trust it? And so that's his basic argument for the evolutionary. That's his basic argument against this idea that just naturalism or materialism is truth. If natural selection just cares about you surviving, and if illusions can be a survival tactic, then how can you trust it? Eric Hernandez is an apologist. You can check out his Eric Hernandez ministries online. He says this is a defeater. This is like waking up and you see that your clock is blinking, and you're like, okay, it's blinking 12, but do I know that it's 12? Because obviously the fact that it's blinking, my power must have been out. So now I can't prove that it's 12. This is definitely a defeater that it's blinking 12. This is a very, very powerful argument, and I think that anybody who's a naturalist like me, and you hear this, and you're like, well, wait, how do I know that I can't trust what I'm feeling and what I feel is certain about? So if I'm coming up with this thing about illusions, how can I trust that? Very, very powerful, and I'm sure it'll come up in the questions and come up again. There's a reason why I think it doesn't do what it appears to do at first. The fact that all these different groups have these different moral systems and these moral beliefs, and they use their reasoning and their logic and their morals, like I was talking about before, to come up with a completely different and contradictory system. The fact that there's so much diversity and variation and contradiction across 7 billion people, that doesn't mean that there isn't an objective truth. It could be that one of them is right. Like we said before, Shinto could be right, or the volcano god could be right. The Greek pantheon could be correct, and we fell away from that. Or Christianity could be true. Any of that could be true objectively. But here we are with 7 billion people who have these different views about what's true, what's morally true, and even what's reasonably true, since I said that our morality and our reason works together. I want to go back to Stephen Worthy from Standardized Apologetics. When he was talking to, he was debating Tom Jump, and he talked about this. They're also talking about morality, and he used a analogy of golf, of a golf game. And so you didn't see the golf game, but you meet two people and they have two different golf scores, and they both saw the same game. And one guy goes, here's the golf score, and the other guy says, no, here's the golf score. Two different golf scores. And Stephen Worthy says, okay, so what? At least one of them has to be wrong. There's no way that they're both correct. One of them has to be law of non-contradiction. One of those has to be right. Or that's not true. At least one of them has to be wrong. They could both be wrong, but there's no way they're both correct. It's impossible for them to both be correct. So now, when I think about 7 billion people with all their different moral and reasonable conclusions around the world, 7 billion people, I think of it as like walking into a golf resort, and there's, say, 12 or 15 groups with different golf scorecards. And even within each of those 12 or 15 groups, there's different discrepancies about how they arrived at the score. And so you just have all these different people who come at you and say, we saw the game, here's what happened. and you don't have access to the game, you didn't see the game, and let's say the chief of security says, hey, there's an objective answer to this. I have cameras on every single hole in the course. You can view those cameras and you can count it yourself and you'll know what the objective answer is to this. But I'm not going to share that to you. I want you to tell me what you know already, just based off of the fact that these, so let's say 15 groups, all have contradictory scores. And the thing that we know is that most of them are wrong. Almost all of those people are wrong to some degree. They might have something, some of the names are right. They might, again, let's say that the game existed. They might have some of it right, but to some degree, most of those people are wrong. And the fact that most of the people are wrong is why I'm skeptical that there's an objective truth to these moral conclusions that we reach, especially about whether there's a religion or not, or how that religion will work. And again, I tie religion and morality together because I'm saying that we're a moral species, and so for us, for all 7 billion of us, morality is everything. Whether we are religious or whether we're not religious, we're still these moral creatures with these moral conclusions that we feel is objectively true, but most of us have to be wrong. And so if there's 7 billion people who have to mostly be wrong, then that makes me think that either a few people are right, or it's possible that we're all wrong and that we're all fooling ourselves. And this is why I'm at least skeptical to say that there was some objective moral truth outside of us that would settle the score. It could be that way. And you know, I was raised Southern Baptist, so if it turns out that I'm wrong, the way I learned about it, I'm going to find out soon enough. But I think that would be the only way to absolutely, for me to find out, at least, you know, maybe because I'm rebellious. But my point is that if most people have to be wrong, then it could be that we're all wrong, but it's something that helps us survive. So in this case, when I look at the evolutionary argument against naturalism as just me, at first I'm worried because I'm like, I want to believe that I can trust myself. I want to believe that I'm reasonable and that I'm a moral person and that I'm making the right judgment. So it scares me when I hear about the evolutionary argument against naturalism. The first time I heard it, I'm like, oh, that's scary. But when I scale back and look at the entire planet of 7 billion people who are also certain that they're right, and I know that almost all of them are to some degree wrong, then that makes me think that wrongness permeates us when it comes to this. And that gives me reason to think that we could be fooling ourselves with this. It could be an illusion. Perhaps not, but I'm not definitely saying it doesn't exist. I'm just saying it's one reason why I worry about it. I got a few more minutes left, and I just want to say that if there is an objective morality, if like Stephen Worthy says, this is something that came from outside of us, whether Sam Harris, the atheist, says it's just natural because well-being is better than misery, or whether it's because of some creator made it that way, or it was already that way and it was just the nature of the creator. I hope that it's compassion for everybody. It's an aversion to harm. It's having standards for living. It's having a tolerance for other people to have their different standards, but you're still going to treat them compassionately, working together for the good of mankind. I hope that's it. I hope that's what it is. And if I meet somebody who thinks like that and they say this is objectively morally true, I'm probably not going to push back on that too much. I probably won't push unless they say, no, the objective moral truth is that this volcano requires blood sacrifice and you're next. Then I'm going to argue. But this way of seeing the world that Marlon sees it and Robert sees it, I love that. So I'm not going to push so hard to say that it might not be true, or I'm not going to spend my time trying to make them say that they could be fooling themselves, because I like that. I think that's great. But so I just want to say that this idea of helping other people and still having standards, and then still having these moral platforms and using them to take care of yourself and your community and your family, and thinking of other people around the world. I love that. Maybe because it's objectively true, maybe because I'm fooling myself, but if I am fooling myself, I want to keep fooling myself. And for those of you who also think that's the standard, but you think it's because of a deity, or you think it's because of atheism, keep at it. Keep thinking that. And I'd much rather us agree with each other about how we should live, and disagree on the reasons about how we got there. For me, that's a utopia. If we could just all agree that that's better, and we end up making it so that terrorism doesn't really have a place here, I would be out of a job. but I think we would be a better planet. So I'm all for it. That's one reason why I'm doing these conversations, is that I really agree with that concept, but I just don't know that it's objectively true. But it's definitely a goal. One word, and I'm in my final minute here. One definition for objective is goal-oriented. And I know that's not what we're talking about, but it is one definition. If you look up objective, it's goal-oriented. So like animals are saying, this is our goal, we want to get this done. If we use objective that way, and our goal is for our well-being, whether atheism or whether love of God, but we all agree with well-being, then I'm all for that. And I think that's a goal worth pursuing. That's it.
All right, fellas. Thank you so much for those closing remarks. Now we're going to enter into our Q&A portion of this debate. And we have some questions. So you're going to see the questions pop up at the bottom of the screen here. All right. First question is for you, Richard. Richard, you said we're probably born with loving moral intuitions. So why is the debate not over? These intuitions will be foundational and fundamentals, which other intuitions are tried.
I concede. Well, as I was telling Robert, I agree that we're born with that, and if we want to say that's because God made us that way, then let's say that. I'm not convinced, but I'm okay with not attacking that concept. The reason why I'm skeptical of it is that the fact that it can come back later and change. And Robert's saying, well, that's just a violation later. That's our sinful nature coming back later and overwhelming that God-given love foundation. It could be that way, but it could also be that it's natural selection saying, okay, as a baby you're going to do better being cute, but when you're 14 you're going to do better to be a warrior. So I'm going to make you malleable. I'm going to make it so that you can be cute as a baby and then a killer at 14, and you're going to do better because I don't care if you're a good person or not. All I care about is if you're going to pass on your genes. So I think either one of those could be true, and maybe because I'm a sinner, or maybe because I'm rebellious, I think that the natural selection makes more sense to me. Again, and I'm the illusion guy. So if you want to laugh and say, okay, if your illusion tells you that, then I'm okay with that too.
I mean, don't you think though? Because it seems, I think it's obvious that you're not willing to commit to any position. Are you? Why are you? You're not willing to commit to that position,
right?
So
well, I don't know, because I honestly don't know. I was raised Southern Baptist by a great church. They still treat me like family. I'm friends with all my youth group, and we're all friends now. They don't treat me any differently. So I just don't know the answer. And because I have that Southern Baptist upbringing, I'm sure that's still part of the wiring of my brain. But I just, if I don't know, if I think that I don't know the answer, then I'm just going to say I can't make a call. But I do want to say that the reason why I feel this way is because of my experiences. And that reminds me of a word that Joe Schmid, who's an atheist philosopher, online, he has a book called The Majesty of Reason, in his Facebook page, Majesty of Reason. He has a word called perichoresis, which is when you're talking to somebody, you're not just knowing what they know, you're trying to find out how they got there. And so I just want to explain how I got there. I've got to this position where I don't think there's a God, but I would say I'm agnostic because I'm not putting my foot down. I just did my hand. I'm not putting my hand down. There's no God. But this is how I got here, but because of studying these other people with their moral systems, it led me to believe that a lot of it is malleable, and that's why I tend to think natural selection is true. But I don't know that just because this is my judgment that I'm right, that I'm objectively correct.
But do you know that natural selection is true? Do you know
No, there's plenty of gaps. There's plenty of gaps that keep me awake at night. If you want to scare me to death about what would make me think that maybe I'm completely wrong. You talk about how we all got here. Talk about the design throughout the universe. All that's I say terrifying, to be cute, but really it's amazing to me. It's just absolutely amazing. And even when I had stopped being a Christian, and I saw on the first time I learned about science and all the design about molecules and stars and stuff, I was like, wow, that's amazing. And that kind of pushed me back towards religious thinking, because I'm like, the fact that all this could happen is just really amazing. So like I said at the beginning, I'm a very weak atheist, and I've never made somebody else an atheist. All I've ever really done is made I've made a lot of atheists who just hate religion to come back a little bit. And I've made a lot of religious people who just want to just annihilate people for not believing them to kind of back from the edge a little bit. I've done that a lot, but I've never made somebody say, "Oh my God, there's no God." I've never done that, and that's not really what I want to do, unless they're, terrible people. But I'm not friends with too many people like that.
What are your thoughts on that, Robert?
So you believe natural selection is what started off as moral as babies, but then vicious killers as we get older. Well, the issue with that is when you look at culture, you look at the ancient culture to now, we have progressively gotten more moral. We have become progressively less violent and more moral. So that's a contradiction to what you said with natural selection.
Well, natural selection might say, let's say 70,000 years ago, natural selection might say, the tribes that are most fierce and most zealous, and they just completely, let's say like the volcano village again, they're completely dedicated to that, and the families have kids in hopes that the kids are going to get chosen to get thrown into the volcano, and they all do this extra work to grow the food. Natural selection might say, okay, I choose you guys. Your collective effort, as irrational and untrue as it is, you're doing better than everybody else, so I choose you. And we could all be descended from villages like that. But then as you have more states and more people living together, then that cooperation wiring that I was talking about that's underneath your zealous wiring, your cooperation wiring might come back up and say, okay, you have your standards, but let them have theirs. And don't attack them for having it. Just know that they're wrong, but live peacefully. And then your self-interest wiring might come up and say, actually, you're going to flourish more if you think like this. And then you have kids for 20 generations into that mindset. After hundreds, thousands of years, people might be more genetically inclined to be some zealous, some cooperative, some selfish, but not just outright warriors from birth, because natural selection has favored more of a combination of these three wiring systems. So that's why I think fittest can change. Fittest can be one guy doing great, or it can be a group doing good enough. Natural selection doesn't care. It's whatever's good enough at the time.
Is natural selection biological?
Is natural selection biological? It behaves on biology because life is biology. So as biology is doing what it does, natural selection is more like just observing what's still here. So if everything's single cell, what's that?
If X occurs, Y must occur. So it operates at a constant. If X occurs, Y must occur.
Well, no, because the conditions might change. If there's conditions where a certain trait is more adaptive, then that trait's going to win during those conditions. But if you change the conditions, then that trait might no longer be an addition, or might not be helpful. So you have animals that used to have eyes, several species back, and now they don't have eyes because it wasn't helpful when they moved to a different condition.
All right. Next question. This is for you, Robert. It's a FYI type question. Favorite argument for God's existence? What is your favorite argument for God's existence?
That's a good one. So this is gonna seem biased, but I like the moral argument. But that's also because I kind of put my own twist to the moral argument, adding in the historical relevancy of what I call God's intervention into humanity with the introduction of the Mosaic Law.
Okay. Suttles, do you have a favorite argument for God?
Yeah, I was mentioning before the ones that amaze me. The fact that we're here, the fact that something exists rather than nothing, the fact that there's so much design, and I can see there's a lot of emptiness and destruction in the universe, but here we are. And that might be survivor bias. The fact that we're here, we just think that things are about us, and we just think that's it. But I'm still amazed by that, even if it's just survivor bias, and even if we're the only life forms that have achieved this level of interaction with the universe. It's still amazing to me, big as the universe is. So, and also I was raised Southern Baptist, so I still pray. I just don't know who I'm praying to. And if something's going wrong, I might say, "Oh God, please help me with this," and mean it. But then I just don't, then I'll say, "Okay, I was upset with myself, and I was, I don't know what was going on there." but I still do it. So like I said, weak atheist. In fact, my atheist page, I was going to put weak atheist, but then Fatheist rhymed, so I chose that.
So you're like at a crossroads where you're just divided on where you stand.
For there to be something, I'm divided, and I also understand that a lot of that was my upbringing. So I kind of take that in mind. That I might be doing this because I was raised that way.
It's fair.
All right, another question for Richard. Are you a naturalistic determinist? If so, are morals determined based on evolutionary process for each specific culture, like for the volcano tribe versus the river tribe?
Because I think that naturalism is all there is, yes. But since I don't know what all that involves, and also I'm not, I've got a couple of master's degrees, but not in this. Because I study cognition, and so my master's degrees are in communication and cognition and international relations, not in biology. I don't know enough about it, and those gaps might be helping me, continue to believe in this. But I do think that it evolved naturally, and if there's any guiding force in natural selection and evolution, it seems to be towards what works. And so the fact that even that guidance is there is still amazing. If it doesn't care what happens to us, then that makes me less sure of a deity. But yeah, I do think that everything is that forms naturally, and I can't explain step by step how that happens. But I also want to say that if aliens came and showed us, I might put that in the fine tuning. I might still file that over in fine tuning and say, well, it's still amazing. Even if I understand it, it's still so amazing that it can happen that I still kind of think there might be something behind it. So yeah, I can see how you have conditions that define who that tribe is going to be. So they could be like a volcanic tribe. I'm pointing to his question here. They could be like the volcano tribe or a river tribe, and that has a lot to do with the conditions. And I'm saying that natural selection doesn't care who wins in that case. One tribe could be a really good tribe that, as we see it, cooperative, loving, and the other tribe could wipe them out, and natural selection would say like whatever. And whereas a deity who favors the objective morality of goodness that we were saying, if that existed, he would say that as a violation. Natural selection would say, I don't care.
Okay, so it seems that you're arguing from a materialistic position, but yet you mentioned morals. Okay, so you're saying that morals developed over time.
Yeah.
If morals, because morals are immaterial, you agree with that, right? They're immaterial. Morals are immaterial.
Right. There's not something that we can touch, but it's something that we perceive and we act on.
Right. So if those morals are immaterial, if those morals are immaterial, how do you account for the lack thereof? Because if you're arguing from what we are able to perceive from reality, or what we're able to observe in reality, because that's the definition of a naturalistic, materialistic individual, is that they are perceiving and basing their reality on what they can physically or visually experience. So if morals are immaterial, and yes, we experience morals, how do you account for that? Because if we're talking said that it's a evolutionary process, then I would say that we would have material or some kind of physical evidence to account for that kind of statement, being that you're a naturalistic materialist. Because it seems to me that when you say that, now you're deviating away from materialistic, naturalistic position. It seems like you're deviating away from that standard of what you judge the world that you live in.
Yeah, I absolutely see what you're saying. And this brings up a good point. Atheists, evolutionists have we have a word that's kind of like the God of the gaps, and it's emergence. And emergence is when something comes up that you couldn't predict. It's just something that it's like, why did that happen? There's nothing about the qualities of these parts that would make me think that this whole would emerge. And I mean whole like WHOLE. So whenever that happens, we call it emergence. And a lot of times you'll see the most atheist of atheists, you'll say, why did that happen? And they'll say emergence. End of story. You don't need God. Emergence just happened. But it can be emergence of the gaps. Something happens and we can't quite explain it. And so I would say morality is like that. Just like love, these things are emergent that happen. It's a trait that happened. This immaterial. Well, and when I say naturalism, what you have is you have the introduction of space-time, and you have energy within that space-time, and then the space-time expands, and some of that energy becomes matter, and all the physical forces and stuff within that lead to things. And like inspiring philosophy would say, everything that's happening today was already in that original introduction of space-time and energy, and maybe so, but that's not all material in terms of matter. That's just a bunch of other stuff. So some of this matter and this energy and these other forces, the strong force and the weak nuclear force, are all creating things that come up that you didn't expect, and this is emergence. And so I would easily forgive a religious person saying, well, my deity or my deities did this. And as an atheist, I'll say, well, emergence did it, and that's my gaps because I can't really explain it. But I do think that natural forces can create things that aren't made of matter, but they still exist and we still act on them. Just like the illusion. If I'm saying everything's illusion, but it still gets me to act, then I'm still acting.
What are your thoughts, Robert?
It seems conflicting.
I agree.
Because Do you believe in a soul?
No, I think that's our brain. I think our brain is made up of several networks, and they're all kind of communicating to each other. And some of that we would say is our conscious, and then you have these intuitions, and you might say part of that's your soul, but I don't.
So how do you explain thoughts?
That's the emergence. This is another emergence of the gaps. This is something that emerged that allowed species who could think with their brains. They were able to think better than like a bacteria is still moving, moving towards something and moving away from something. It doesn't have a brain, but you might have a thing of slime that leaves a chemical in its path so that it doesn't backtrack because it can detect that chemical that it left. That doesn't have a brain, and I think brains emerged over time, an emergent property.
What enables you to feel emotions? What enables you to feel emotions?
Well, you'd have to get into the neurology. I've read a few books about neurology. There's a book called How the Brain Made Emotions. Again, I can't go step by step by how that happens, but I believe that it's something that did emerge. I think that
it's neurological. It's from a firing of neurons, to put it simply. Certain neurons fire off, right. But our thoughts are independent because our thoughts can change. The chemical processes can't change once they begin, but our thoughts can affect the firing off of certain neurons that enable us to feel different emotions. So if our thoughts can be changeable, but the processes cannot be changeable, then that means that our thoughts have to be separate from our brain, and that goes into the separation between the mind and the brain, which some neurologists even acknowledge that there is a difference between the mind and the brain. So that's one of the evidence of the soul, is the fact that our thoughts can dictate the firing of certain neurons that enable us to feel a variety of different ways. We can also change the way that we feel. If, like, for example, if I get angry, the way that I think can determine whether I continue to stay angry, or it can change from me getting happy. If I think happy thoughts, chances are I'll feel happy. If I think sad thoughts, I'll feel sad, etc., etc. So I can change the firing off of the neurons based off of my thoughts. So there has to be a soul to justify that. There is no naturalistic explanation to explain that. The naturalistic explanation explains the epistemology of it, but not the ontology.
Well, yeah, and again, ontology would be whatever is true, regardless of what we think about it. But because, from my point of view, I think epistemology is all we have, then I do kind of stick with epistemology. But I would say that in terms of books that explain how different, not just our thoughts, but our hormones and different chemicals all affect our actions and our thoughts. There's a good book called Behave, just one word, Behave, by Robert Sapolsky. And he gives a good overview of all the different forces that go into our thoughts. And it's not just our brain. It could be something chemically that's happening outside. It could be our mood. It could be something that somebody does to us. There's a lot of external things that go into. In fact, there's even some people who say that where you live, the chemistry of the ecology that you live in can affect what you do and your thoughts. So because of all that, that seems so haphazard and so trial and error that's why I'm less skeptical of a soul that knows something pure and true and unadulterated, and I tend to believe that it's more of a haphazard, but it's a haphazardness that's working. And I think our brains is several networks at once, all kind of struggling with each other, along with like a narrative builder. And like a narrative builder is sensing all these thoughts and is saying, okay, here's what's happening. Here's what's happening. And a good book by that, I didn't bring it. There's a book called The Consciousness Instinct by Dr. Gazaniga, I think so I'll pronounce that name. I have it written down here. But this narrative builder, and they can prove this with experiments, is it'll see you doing something and it'll come up with a story about why you did it, even if that's not the story. And they were able to determine that with people with epilepsy, where they severed the connection between the right hand and between the right brain and the left brain, and they put something that could keep their eyes seeing different things. They would show instructions to one side of the brain to do something, and you would do it, but you wouldn't know why. Your part of your brain saw the instruction, but the other brain didn't understand that it saw it. So it would say, open up the umbrella. He'd open up the umbrella. And then somebody would say, why did you open the umbrella? And he would say, well, I thought it might rain. Maybe there's a leak. So there's like a narrative builder. What's that?
Do you believe we have free will?
Well, I wouldn't know where it comes from. I wouldn't know where free will comes from. It's if you have all these different systems throwing thoughts and a narrative builder that's not always correct. If I open up an umbrella and then a narrative builder says, I thought it might rain, obviously that's not always correct. It's just something that says, come up with something quick, and it comes up with something. So then at that point, I don't know what free will is.
But if everything is just solely biological processes, then we're just machines. We don't have a will. We're just bound by the influences of the neurons, and just so if we're fortunate enough to have neurons that fire off in a way that will produce us to be moral and to make great moral judgments, then it's good for us. But if we're unfortunate, then we're going to have neurons firing off at rates that would make us immoral. We're just machines. We're just machines prone to our circumstances. If we're fortunate enough to be brought up in a good home and good environment, we'll be successful. If we're unfortunate and brought up in a bad home, then it's like it's just a loss. Which biological processes cannot explain everything. Which even almost every credible, or at least there's a strong consensus among the top psychologists and neurologists, and even in the field of neurophilosophy, agree that it cannot be solely biological processes. Biological processes play a role, absolutely, but there's some gaps to where it cannot be solely biological.
So yeah, I don't know in terms of whether most neurologists or biologists think that. I mean
in the top category, especially in neurophilosophy. If you look at I believe her name is Patricia Churchland, she kind of revolutionized the field of neurophilosophy. I quoted a couple top people in that. The Moral Psychology Handbook has several neurologist psychologists that came together just to put that handbook on what the scientific evidence is behind our ethics, morality, motivation, etc.
There's a book here I made a note of called Conscience: The Origins of Moral Intuitions by Churchland in 2019. I don't know if that's the same. We can look it up and see if that's the same book. So
the book, yeah, I'm sorry.
I do think it's biology along with the surrounding conditions. So whatever the surrounding conditions is, and your biology, a living organism is made up of the biology reacting to the surrounding conditions. And all of that together works together for an end product. And natural selection doesn't care who wins. And we're here, so it's amazing. And we love that we're still here. and that our ancestors made it, and here we are so far. We've still made it, and we hope that we will. Keep going on. It's scary and terrifying, and I hate it that it's all so mechanical and not guided by some a loving being who knows better and has a plan. I hate that, but I think that's probably the way it is.
Yeah, well, I'm not disputing that there isn't biological process. I believe there are biological mechanical processes. I just don't believe that there's solely biological process. I believe it's biological process, and I do believe it's environment. But there also is some such thing as a will. You can be in certain circumstances and still operate in a way that is different from that upbringing. So it's like if you take 10 people, put them in the same society, the same environment, same circumstances. Not all 10 of them will grow up the same way. Is it likely some of them? Possibly. But there may be 9 of them that end up like that, and one goes off and does something that the other 9 don't do. You look at it with people in poverty, for example. People were brought up in poverty. Not everybody who's brought up in poverty stays in povery. So then what differentiates that person that's taken out of poverty? If it's only biological processes, then why did the biological process favor that one person that got out and not favor the other 9?
Well, one thing is that variation. We're all born with different genetic variation, and then another thing, you have different experiences. So if you have those same 10 people, but an organization comes and whisks 3 of them away to give them a new life, that's a whole new set of opportunities.
Do you believe that genes can change? Do you believe our DNA can change?
Well,
like throughout generations?
Our DNA, yeah, like there could be mutations during your lifetime. Yeah, absolutely.
So I believe.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
What were you saying?
No, I said there is. You're correct. There is evidence to show that our DNA changes over time, but there's also evidence to show that based off of your moral character that can actually change your DNA coding. So for example, somebody who lives a virtuous life, that can affect their DNA coding. So then when they have offspring, that offspring will have an inclination to moral based virtuous lifestyle. That's actually a confirmation of like what the Bible says about God. God will love a righteous man to the I believe the 6th or 7th generation.
Right. Right. I remember those quotes about 3 or 4 generations, depending on wrath or love.
4th generation.
I absolutely agree that I was going to say I absolutely agree that how you live your life can have a profound effect on you and your future generations. So we don't just have our genetics; we have epigenetics. And so you can have twins, like a mom could have 2 twins, same DNA, but one's epigenetics makes a few differences, and then that could lead to wildly different outcomes just because of what happened inside of the gene. So you're right that DNA can change, be the same DNA, different epigenetics, different chemicals get involved with the body. All of that could lead.
All right, guys, we're gonna transition to this final question.
Okay.
All right, question for Richard. Is the golden rule an objective moral instinct we're born with, which regulates all other subjective moral institutions? Intuition, sorry.
I don't think that it regulates that, but I do think it's part of this this well of meaning that I was saying that we can form. So we have the well, again, if my argument is true, we have the well, and we can say that we start off with compassion and aversion to harm or harming other people. But when you look at these other things about standards and loyalty and whether our compassion should be directed toward people who agree with us or whether we should just believe that they have human value, all of that can make it so that you don't believe in the golden rule. But if you think humans have value and you put that in your well, whether you consciously do it or whether you just feel it, but it's in your well of meaning, then you're going to behave that way. And you could do that because you're an atheist and just say, hey, we're all people and I like people. Or you could be in Islam and you can say, actually, I don't like people, but the fact that it's not the Quran, it's another set of scripture for the Muslims that say, if you love God, serve your fellow man. They can say, hey, it's in the scripture, so I do it. There's Christians who say, look, it's just true, and so I follow the rules. But if you're doing that, I think that's very effective. It might not be. It might get you killed. But right now we're in conditions where it can be very helpful. And in fact, it seems to be even be called for more. We probably have more of a need for it right now. But I don't know that it's necessarily going to be an objective truth that always gets people by. Sometimes it could be love certain people as yourself, but not others. That could be what's driving people. And natural selection might say, okay, you guys are going to win because natural selection doesn't care.
What about you, Robert? What are your thoughts on this question?
Do you believe babies follow the golden rule?
Well,
When they do
that compassion,
when they demonstrate moral behaviors.
no, I think at that age, it's compassion, but definitely compassion towards people that are taking care of it, and aversion to harm because they understand that could happen to them. And then from there, it's not a blank slate, but an area that can be programmed later. So to a degree, that first being cute, being sweet to their mom, aversion to harm, that is a behaving according to their implant. Yeah, the same way a badger might, a beaver, badger, I always mix this up. The same way a songbird might sing a song, it's just it's part of the implant. Is it a moral code or is it just their wiring? And I guess it could be both. But
Well, that's what I
think we
believe.
follow our. Go ahead.
I believe there's a moral map, and then the wiring in our brain is a vehicle to where morality becomes what would be material. Not that I think morality is material. I don't know any other way to describe it. In the same way that there's a car, but it needs the wheels to be able to drive on the road. If you take the wheels out, that doesn't mean the car is non-existent. That just means that it lacks the ability to drive. So the brain is a driving force for our morality.
I see how you arrived at that.
All right, folks. Good discussion, good debate, you guys. You guys did well. And we're going to close this thing out. So as always, I send gifts out to those who participate in debates. So I'll be contacting you. You'll get one of these fancy mugs, man, with the Gospel Truth logo and everything. And, it's good stuff, man. Solid material. Can hold your coffee really well. You know what I mean? So it's a great gift. I just want to send that gift out to you and just a token of my appreciation for coming on, taking time away from your families and preparing for this, and keeping the schedule, man. Because sometimes people will say, you know what, never mind, I ain't debating. You know what I mean? So
It almost happened with me.
Yeah, man, it's tough, man. Sometimes life circumstances, man. So I thank you guys for joining me on this episode, and I'll be contacting you guys after the show to get your address, man. All right?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, another great discussion, great debate. So what do you guys think out there? Objective morals. Obviously my position is that you can't account for them. If you're an atheist, man, you got to be able to give a standard for the reason that you believe things. And the atheistic position cannot account for them consistently, and it's one of those things where this debate will continue to go on and on and on until the Lord Jesus Christ comes back. But we are called to still minister and converse with these individuals who disagree with us. And that's the goal, right? In the gospel truth, man, we're here to engage the culture of Christian truth. And that is through conversation, through debate, through interviews, the whole nine, man, just to gather understanding and to be able to converse and be able to talk with individuals who disagree with us on these very, very important subject matters. So, and it's our call to preach the gospel. Tell people about the gospel of Jesus Christ. The gospel, the atoning work of Christ did on the cross, the death of Christ and the resurrection of Christ to atone for the sins of the world and to redeem his people. And not only that, from an eschatological view, he's going to redeem creation as well. What sin has done and damaged this world, Christ is redeeming and bringing people to into a loving and glorious relationship with him. And that's what the gospel truth is all about. And so I thank Richard and Robert for coming on this episode of the Gospel Truth. And I thank you for joining me in this episode. So before I get out of here, I do want to rehash some announcements of shows that I have coming up. Coming up August 8th, I have a Black Hebrew Israelite versus Christian debate. Can you be justified by the law of Moses according to Paul? That's coming up August 8th at 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. After that, I have myself and Mr. Riz. We're going to be talking about some morality. So a lot of what we discussed today is probably going to come up in my discussion of morality. So it's going to be a fun discussion. I can't wait for it. Pretty excited about it. Coming up August 11th at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. After that, I have Side 10 versus Armin Navabi. Does God exist? And that's coming up August 13th at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. This should be a great debate. Armin has a crazy following as an atheist. I think he's the lead of the biggest atheist platform there is, I think. Something like that. And we all know Side 10. And Side 10 is great. God-fearing man and one of the better precept apologists out there. So it's going to be a fantastic debate. Fantastic. So I hope you're on the lookout for that one. After that, I have George Alvarado versus Matt Singleton. Was Jesus eternally or incarnationally the Son of God? So that's coming on August 22nd at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. That's just the next 4 shows on the Gospel Truth. We had a great discussion, and if you want to see more of discussions and debates that I've had on the show or interviews, make sure you're liking and subscribing to the Gospel Truth. Make sure you're hitting that notification bell so you don't fall out of the loop of what the Gospel Truth has going on. Make sure you are subscribing. Hit the like, hit the subscribe, and hit that bell so you don't miss anything. With that said, I am going to get out of here. And once again, I thank Richard and Robert for coming on. And may God bless you, and may God keep you. I'm gone.